Today's video will show you horrific Bigfoot encounters that will make you regret watching alone. From a veteran hunter whose act of mercy towards Bigfoot spirals into a relentless pursuit, to 4 Montana Rangers whose routine Bigfoot investigation turns into a coordinated night of separation and psychological manipulation. I've been hunting these mountains for 30 years. I know the difference between a grizzly track and a black bear's, between the cough of a sick elk and the warning bark of a healthy one. I know when something is watching me from the timber, and I've learned not to turn around too fast. What I didn't know, what no amount of winters in a wall tent could have taught me, was that the woods have been lying to everyone. The stories about Bigfoot, the ones that painted as shy or noble or just lost, those stories are lies. The real thing is something else entirely, and I met it on a November afternoon when the snow was just starting to stick and the light was going yellow and wrong. The bull bison had Bigfoot pinned against a deadfall, both horns buried deep into its left thigh, and the sound coming out of the creature's mouth was the worst thing I had ever heard in 30 years of backcountry hunting. Thin, reedy, almost childlike, a whimpering that had no business living inside a chest that wide. I was 200 yards out when I saw them through the trees, and my brain spent a full second refusing what my eyes were sending it. 8 feet tall at least, shoulders like a barn door, covered in thick, dark auburn fur, matted black with blood where the horns had gone in. That wrong human sound coming from something that was not human at all. If this thing was real and dying right in front of me, could I really just leave it there? I didn't think so. I raised the rifle, found the bison's spine behind the shoulder, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the basin and echoed off the far tree line and came back flat and hard. The bull lurched sideways. I cycled the bolt, fired again into the neck, again into the base of the skull, and 4 seconds after the first round, the bull went down heavy and rolled onto its side in the snow, blood spreading out beneath it in a dark stain that steamed in the cold air. Bigfoot hadn't moved. Still pinned, thigh skewered on one of the horns jutting from 1,000 pounds of dead animal, it turned its head and looked directly at me with amber eyes the color of old whiskey. It did not blink, not once, not in all the time I stood there staring back at it across the snow. I should have walked away. Instead, I walked forward through the crunching snow, pulled the bison's head until the horn came free, and knelt beside the wound. The thigh was laid open to the bone. I could see the pale shaft of the femur through 3 inches of torn muscle. Blood pumped out in a thick, almost black rhythm. I reached into my pack for the fishing line I always carry, and the curved suture needle I'd bought at a farm supply store on a whim 3 seasons back, and I stitched that wound closed in the dark while Bigfoot watched me do it. I worked with a headlamp. Neither of us moved except my hands. Bigfoot's breathing slowed from ragged gasps to something steadier, and around 2 in the morning, it finally closed those amber eyes. I sat back against a log and watched the stars wheel overhead and tried not to think about what would happen when it woke up. When morning came, would it remember the man who helped it, or only the fact that I was there? Dawn came gray and quiet. When I heard the shift of weight and the deep exhale, Bigfoot was already standing, fully upright, head clearing the lower pine branches by half a foot. I looked at the thigh. The wound, 43 stitches of 10-pound monofilament, 4 hours of work, had closed to a flat pink scar. The fishing line lay in the snow beside its foot, shed like a snakeskin. The flesh beneath had knit itself together overnight as cleanly as if it had never been opened. Bigfoot stood there breathing. I stood there breathing. Then it lifted its head and sniffed the air in slow, methodical pulls, turning its face north, then west, then directly toward me. Something changed in its expression, a loosening around the eyes, a settling of the jaw, and I recognized it the way you recognize it in a dog that has stopped deciding whether you're friend or enemy. Whatever gratitude had been there was gone. It had cataloged me, filed me. The amber eyes went cold in a different way. It smiled. The lips pulled back, and I saw the teeth, pieces of a shattered dinner plate, jagged and overlapping, far too many in a jaw far too wide. Then it reached down and picked up my hunting knife from where it had fallen out of my pack during the night, turned the blade between 2 fingers the size of summer sausages, and snapped it. Not the handle, the blade. 4 inches of hardened steel, clean off. It set the handle down in the snow with something that felt almost like courtesy, almost like a statement of terms. I ran. I hit the tree line at full sprint and didn't look back for the first 100 yards. When I did, Bigfoot was not running. It was walking, a long, loose, ground-eating stride, arms swinging easy, unhurried, like something that has never in its life needed to hurry. It was already closing the distance. I understood immediately that it was not trying to catch me, not yet, because it was walking in wide arcs just inside my peripheral vision, cutting left when I cut left, drifting right when I angled right. Herding, the word landed in my brain like a stone dropped in still water. I had a satellite phone in my pack. I reached it without stopping, fumbled it out while my boots punched through the frozen crust, watched the screen blink to life. 1 bar. I was scanning for a clearing when I found one. A natural meadow 60 yards ahead, maybe 2 acres of open ground. I hit it at a dead run and had the phone up and was keying in the emergency sequence when Bigfoot stepped out of the trees on the far side of the meadow. Not from behind me, from ahead. It had circled without me seeing it, silent for its size, and it sat down cross-legged in the snow directly in front of me like it had been waiting. The amber eyes went to the satellite phone. Then Bigfoot reached out and took it from my hand. I was too stunned to resist and crushed it. One slow, deliberate squeeze. The screen shattered, the case buckled, and pieces of plastic and circuit board rained down on the snow between us. How had it known exactly what that phone was for? I turned and ran again. The deadfall was 50 yards into the timber, a pile of logging slash from some operation 20 or 30 years back, trunks stacked on trunks, a structure of organized chaos that had slumped and settled over the decades into something almost architectural. I scrambled up the near face, pulled myself over a horizontal trunk as thick as my torso, and dropped into a hollow between 2 stacked timbers with just enough room to wedge myself in. Bigfoot did not scramble. It walked to the base of the pile, found a support log near the bottom, old-growth fur, still mostly sound, and pushed it. Not struck, not kicked. Pushed with what looked like 30% of its available effort. The whole structure groaned. I felt it in my spine, in my back teeth. Timbers that had been leaning together for 2 decades suddenly had new opinions about gravity. The log I was lying on dropped 4 inches with a sound like a rifle shot, and the gap I was wedged in began to close. The ribs on my left side hit first. The pressure built steadily like a vise being turned by someone who has all day, and I was twisting and kicking when a massive hand reached in from below and wrapped around my right boot. The grip was absolute. I felt the boot compress around my foot. I kicked with my left leg and connected with nothing, then kicked again, and my heel found the rotted face of an old timber that had gone punky, and it dissolved under the impact in a shower of wood pulp and bark and something metallic. Logging cable. An inch thick, rusted orange-brown, but still fundamentally steel. The old high-lead stuff buried in the slash pile, since whoever logged this country last had gone home and forgotten it. I grabbed it with both hands and wound it around my left wrist, 1 full turn, and felt the individual strands bite into my jacket. Then I braced my right foot against the nearest solid timber and kicked straight back into the grip. The grip held. I kicked again. Nothing. Bigfoot had my boot in both hands now. I could feel it repositioning, and I understood with sudden clarity that it was going to pull me out of this pile the way you pull a cork from a bottle. And if it got me out into the open, what happened next? I let my weight drop. The full slack of my body hit the cable, and the cable went rigid, the far end. Buried deep in the pile, wrapped around something I couldn't see, went taut against its anchor. That anchor was connected to the structural heart of the pile. The whole thing tipped, the whole mass rotating around the fulcrum of the log Bigfoot had pushed first. Half-ton timbers began to slide. The hand released my boot. I heard the sound of massive weight redistributed suddenly and without preparation, and then the pile came apart outward in a cascade of rolling trunks and splitting wood that took Bigfoot down and backward into the debris field. I came out the other side on my hands and knees, stood up into a run. My left shoulder was screaming. Something had twisted in the socket when the cable snapped tight, and I ran with that arm pressed against my side like a broken wing and my lungs burning. And behind me, the debris field settled and went quiet. I gave it 30 seconds before I started to believe I'd bought myself real time. Then I heard the footsteps resume. The ravine opened without warning, the trees hiding it until I was already on the edge, and I went down the bank sideways, skating on mud and pine duff, and hit the bottom in a crouch that saved my ankles but drove my knees into the gravel. The river was narrow here, maybe 15 feet across, squeezed between cut banks of dark clay running high with snowmelt. I waded in without stopping. The cold was extraordinary. Not painful at first, too cold for pain, the kind of cold that simply erases sensation from the knee down and then begins working on your judgment. I was chest deep within 20 feet, feeling the current push at me in long, patient shoves, and I was moving upstream because downstream meant lower ground, and lower ground meant open ground, and open ground was where Bigfoot wanted me. The riverbed was fist-sized cobbles, slick with algae, and every step was a negotiation between balance and forward momentum that I was steadily losing. And if the river took my footing before Bigfoot reached me, which one would kill me first? The splash behind me was enormous. Not the tentative entry of something testing the water, a full commitment, both feet at once. The sound of serious weight displaced in a single instant. I didn't look back. I kicked forward, tried to get my feet under me on the cobbles, slipped and went down to one knee with water flooding over my shoulder and into my collar and down the back of my neck, in an ice bath that made me gasp and swallow water and come back up coughing. The hand around my ankle came from below. It had gone completely under, in water that was maybe 40 degrees, moving fast, with a current strong enough to stagger me. Bigfoot had gone under and moved through it like something that had done this before, had trained for it, had been patient in cold rivers for years, and now it had both hands around my right ankle and was pulling, not up, down, and back. I went under face first, and the world became brown water, and the muffled roar of current and the absolute immediate fact of that grip dragging me deeper. What chance did I have against something that seemed prepared for every escape I tried? I got my left foot around and found something with my heel, a face, a shoulder, hard bone through dense tissue, and pushed. Kicked my leg straight with everything I had. The grip slipped an inch. I kicked again, and the grip released, and I got my head up and gasped one full breath, went under again shallower, and came back up in time to see the beaver dam 30 yards ahead. A solid wall of sticks and mud and old branches, 4 feet tall, spanning the entire river. I drove myself forward through the current, swimming now because wading was too slow, and dove at the base blind. The sticks tore my jacket. I reached forward and grabbed and pulled and dragged myself through 6 feet of sticks and mud and cold water and came out the other side gasping, rolling onto my back in the flat pond behind the dam, looking up at a sky gone pale gray. The dam shook. The whole structure shuddered as something large hit it from the upstream side, sticks popping, water finding new paths. I rolled and swam hard for the bank. Behind me, the dam shook again, and I heard it tearing open. How much time did that barrier really buy me? The south bank was a granite outcrop, a rock face rising in broken ledges beside a small waterfall dropping 8 feet into the pond. I hit the base at a dead swim and grabbed the first ledge and hauled myself up, wet clothes, adding 20 pounds, fingers barely functional from the cold. 10 feet. The surface was glazed with spray ice that my boots broke through when I was lucky and skated off when I wasn't. 15 feet. I looked down. Bigfoot was through the dam, standing in the pond, water to its waist, watching me with those amber eyes. Then it started toward the rock face and began to climb. It climbed the way it did everything, with total certainty, no hesitation, weight shifting smoothly between holds like it had climbed worse than this and wasn't particularly concerned. 20 feet. The waterfall spray hit my face, and the ledge under my boots was 4 inches wide, and my fingers had stopped sending reliable messages. I looked up. The next ledge was 6 feet above me. I looked down. Bigfoot was 10 feet below me and still climbing. I let go. Straight down along the face of the rock, tucking my chin, and hit the plunge pool at the base of the waterfall feet first. The rocks at the bottom came up faster than I expected. The left one hit my thigh, and the right one hit my ribs, already compressed in the log pile, and the combination drove the air out of me in an underwater grunt. I came up, crawled onto the gravel bar on my hands and knees, water streaming off me. How many more hits could my body take before it stopped cooperating? Bigfoot was still on the rock face. It descended methodically, hit the gravel 30 seconds later, stood 12 feet away, and watched me try to stand. Something in its expression had shifted almost imperceptibly. Not frustration, not anger. Assessment, like it was noting something down. I stood and I ran. The cabin was a trapper's shelter, decades old, door hanging on one leather hinge, floor flexing under my weight with the deep uncertainty of wood that has spent too long under a failing roof. I hit it at full speed, and the floor flexed once, twice, and fell through. The whole center section dropped, a 4-foot square of rotten planking, that disintegrated under my weight, and I dropped 6 feet into the root cellar below, landing on packed dirt, rolling to absorb the impact. I lay there 3 seconds, staring up through the hole at gray light. Then I was on my feet. What in this place could possibly stop something like Bigfoot? The root cellar was 5 feet of headroom, dim, and hanging from the ceiling joists on loops of baling wire were 6 leg-hold traps. Number 4s, big ones, with 8-inch jaw spread and springs that had only gotten stiffer with 40 years of rust. I got 3 down, the ones with the most intact springs, and dragged them to the base of the ladder that led up to the original trapdoor. Set them jaw up in a triangle, jammed the jaws open with sections of stick. Then I climbed the shelving on the far wall, old pine that groaned but held, and from the top shelf I reached the floor joists and got myself up into the space where the floor used to be, balanced on 2 beams 10 feet above the root cellar in the dim remains of the cabin. The door frame filled with shadow. Bigfoot ducked under the lintel. The cabin walls bowed slightly inward, as if the structure was trying to accommodate something larger than it was designed for. Bigfoot stood in the middle of the cabin, looking around with those cold amber eyes, then looked down through the hole at the root cellar below. Then it looked up and found me on the beams. It stepped onto the ladder. The first trap took its right foot at the 3rd rung. The metal jaws snapped shut around the ankle with a screech of rust and spring steel that rang through the cabin like a gunshot. Bigfoot stopped, looked down, reached down with both hands, and simply pulled the trap open. Not off, just open. Jaws spread apart with the same easy effort I'd use opening a cabinet door, and stepped off the rung and onto the root cellar floor, right into the 2nd trap. If it could do that to steel, what exactly was I expecting these traps to accomplish? This one took the left foot at the arch, and for a moment I saw something flicker across Bigfoot's face that was not the calm assessment of everything that had come before. Annoyance. It knelt to address the 2nd trap, and that was when I dropped. 3rd trap in both hands, 10 feet of controlled fall, landing squarely on Bigfoot's back with enough impact to drive it forward onto its hands. I jammed the trap between its shoulder blades where the muscles flanked the spine and hit the release plate with my palm. The jaws snapped shut. Bigfoot straightened up immediately, reaching back, and I was already moving. Off its back, scrambling toward the back wall where a small horizontal window let in a slot of gray light, maybe 18 inches tall. I went through it head first. My hips hung for a moment, then I twisted and dropped into the ferns outside, Bigfoot's hand missing my boot by 3 inches. Behind me in the cabin came the sound of the trap finally releasing from something that did not yield easily, and then came the roar. Bigfoot had not made any real sound until that moment. This one went through me like a physical force, like standing too close to an explosion. Every bird within half a mile left its tree at once. I was in the ferns and sprinting, soaking wet, shoulder wrecked, ribs screaming, and behind me that sound rolled across the basin like it owned everything in it. I kept moving. The burn scar started without ceremony. One step I was in green timber, and the next I was in a dead world. Black snags, most leaning or fallen, ash on the ground, gray and fine, swallowing my boots to the ankle. The sky overhead was fully visible for the first time in hours, and the wind was picking up from the northwest in a way I knew from years of fire country travel. I went up a dead pine because there was no other option. The open ground of the burn scar was working in Bigfoot's favor, and elevation was the only variable I could change. Bigfoot was a shape in the black snags 300 yards back, steady and unhurried. The tree was a 60-foot skeleton, bark long gone, wood gone silver and dry as old bone, and I climbed the stub branches like a ladder, each one taking my weight for a half second before threatening to let go. At 55 feet, a branch snapped, and I was falling before I fully understood I was falling. Hit the first solid branch at 30 feet, and it broke clean, and the second at 20, and it broke too. And then I was in the fork of the trunk at 15 feet, wedged there like something the tree had decided to keep. The impact that stopped me felt like being struck by a car, a hard, whole-body stop with no give to it at all. Ribs, 2 of them, maybe 3. The wet crack was internal and intimate and impossible to misinterpret, and the breath went out of me and didn't come back for what felt like a long time. I slid down the remaining 15 feet and landed in the ash on my side. The dark shape in the burn was still moving, still closing, half a mile back, and patient as weather. I got up. The wind hit the ash, and it lifted. A column of fine gray particulate spun up from a depression in the burn scar floor 20 feet across, dark at the base and pale at the top, rotating and growing. A fire devil, the kind that forms in dry burn scars on windy afternoons. It drifted north on the wind and grew, and Bigfoot stopped, stood in the black snags, and watched the spinning column with those amber eyes. And for the first time I saw something in its expression that looked almost like uncertainty. I crawled to the burned-out pickup at the edge of the scar. In the bed, a rusted propane tank, a 20-pounder, the kind you'd take car camping. The valve was seized. I turned it, felt it break loose, heard the hiss, pressed my thumb over the valve opening for 3 seconds to build pressure, then aimed and threw it into the base of the fire devil. The metal clanged against frozen ash, the valve sparked against a buried rock, and the fireball was not large, maybe 8 feet across, but it was enough. The fire devil became a column of fire. The rotation accelerated. It moved across the burn scar on the northwest wind with a crackling, roaring momentum, and it went directly for Bigfoot. Bigfoot ran. I had not seen it run yet. That terrible ground-eating walk was bad enough, but this was something else. Legs reaching and arms driving, and that massive body flowing across the ash in strides that must have been 15 feet apiece, covering ground at a rate that made no sense for a biped of that size. It ran south. I ran north. The fire devil spun and grew and chased between us, and I ran until the ash gave way to mineral soil, and the soil gave way to rock, and the rock ended at the edge of the world, 300 feet straight down. The canyon below was a narrow slot cut by water working on stone for longer than humans had existed, and the walls were nearly vertical. A ledge ran along the cliff face, 6 inches wide, a natural break in the granite paralleling the rim for as far as I could see in either direction. I stepped onto it. Back to the rock, arms spread at my sides like I was trying to hold the wall up, shuffling sideways with my heels hanging over 300 feet of open air. 50 feet. The ledge was solid granite, no flex, no crumble. 75 feet. The stone was cold through my jacket, and the wind came off the canyon in unpredictable gusts that pressed me in and then tried to pull me out. My broken ribs announced themselves with every breath. 2 sharp points inside my chest, grinding when I inhaled too deeply, so I learned to breathe shallow and fast like a dog. 100 feet out from the rim, and the ledge was still 6 inches wide, and I kept my eyes on the rock face in front of my nose and did not look down again. Stones scraped behind me. I looked back, and Bigfoot was on the ledge. It was not pressed against the rock. It stood fully upright, chest to the sky, arms loose at its sides, walking the ledge the way you'd walk a painted line in a parking lot, as if the 300-foot drop on its left were a detail beneath its attention. Its strides were long and easy, and it was already 40 feet closer than when I'd looked 30 seconds ago. I shuffled faster, misjudged the lip of the ledge with my right heel, and pressed back into the rock so hard my shoulder blades scraped granite, and I felt my heart do something architectural in my chest. Found my footing, kept moving. The ledge ended. A section of the cliff face had fractured and fallen at some point in the geological past. Where the ledge had been, there was now a clean 3-foot gap, and beyond it, the cliff face was featureless. Nothing to grab, nothing to stand on. I was on the last 6 inches of continuous ledge, and Bigfoot was 20 feet behind me and still walking, and it smiled at me again with those shattered plate teeth. Above the gap, maybe 6 feet overhead, a dead pine had toppled over the rim and lodged there, its root ball exposed, thick roots hanging down like a curtain. I jumped straight up, grabbed the nearest root with both hands, felt my shoulder tear something new and significant, and held on. The root flexed outward with my weight. I swung. At the apex, I was over the gap, and I let go and hit the far side of the cliff face with my boots and my palms and began to slide. My fingers found a horizontal crack and arrested the slide, feet scrabbling, and looked right, a lower ledge, 18 inches wide, dropping away to a talus slope that met the canyon floor 150 feet below. I dropped onto it, and my knees buckled, and I was sliding on the talus, riding loose rock down the slope, grabbing at nothing, and the canyon floor was rushing up, and I tucked and rolled, and the boulder pile at the bottom arrived all at once. The left leg snapped below the knee. I heard it the same way I'd heard the ribs. Intimate. Wrong. The pain followed a half-second later, enormous and clarifying, and I hit the gravel of the creek bank and lay still. Above me on the talus slope, a shape. Bigfoot had gone off the rim itself, not the ledge, 15 feet above, dropping free onto the talus in a controlled fall no human body could have managed, landing and skiing down it on its feet in a shower of displaced rock. It landed on the gravel bar and walked toward me. Walked, no limp, no hesitation. It stood over me and looked down, and I looked up at it against the pale sky, and I had absolutely nothing left. No weapon, no plan, no running. The leg was broken, and the ribs were broken, and my shoulder had been wrong since the log pile, and I was hypothermic from the river, and I was finished. I rolled into the creek, 6 inches of snowmelt over algae-slick cobbles, barely enough to float a hand, and I rolled into it because it was the only direction I could move. Bigfoot stepped in after me, and the cobbles shifted under its weight, and the left foot went out. Not a full fall, a slip, a momentary loss of purchase, and the forehead came down on the boulder at the creek's edge with a sound like a bat hitting a watermelon. Bigfoot went down on both hands in the creek, stunned, head hanging. 3 seconds, maybe 4. I grabbed the sharpest rock within reach, fractured granite, angular, the size of a grapefruit, and swung it with everything I had left. It connected with Bigfoot's face in a burst of black blood and the crack of something structural giving way, and Bigfoot's head snapped sideways, and the mouth came open wide, and the howl that came out was not the thin human whimpering from before. This was enormous and ragged, the sound of something that had finally, unexpectedly, felt something it did not like. The claws came across my back in 4 parallel lines of fire, and I was rolling again, into the current, moving downstream, and the creek was dropping. I could hear it, the pitch of the water changing, faster, more turbulent. And then I saw the culvert, a mining drainage pipe, concrete, maybe 3 feet in diameter, disappearing into the cliff face at the downstream end of the canyon. The creek surface went flat before it and slipped over the lip into the dark at a downslope angle. I went in. The cold closed over me completely. The pipe was just wide enough for my body with my arms stretched ahead, and the water filled every inch of available space, and the rock walls moved past my hands in total darkness. I could not see. I could hear nothing but the roar of moving water in an enclosed space. My fingers scraped concrete and found no purchase, and the current took me, and I moved. I moved through the dark with the water filling my mouth and my ears and my nose, and the walls closed on all sides. And behind me in the canyon, there was nothing. No sound of pursuit, no splash, nothing. The dark was complete. The water was very cold. The walls were very close. I moved. I don't know how long the culvert was. I know there was an end to it, or I wouldn't be telling this, but in the dark and cold of that pipe, the concept of an ending was abstract and far away. All I knew was the water in my mouth and the rock scraping my palms and the current moving me forward into nothing. I have not been back to that basin. The leg healed, the ribs healed, the 4 lines across my back healed to scars I can feel when I reach behind me. And sometimes in the dark before I'm fully asleep, I feel the grip around my ankle again, that absolute, total grip, and I lie still and I wait for it to release me. My name is David Reyes. I have been a wilderness guide and trail naturalist in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 16 years. I run interpretive hike, wildlife education programs, and backcountry tours for groups of 2 to 12. I am telling you this because what I encountered in the backcountry above Alum Cave Trail in late August was not an animal I had a catalog entry for. The group was a party of 4 weekend hikers, recreational experience level, booked through the Visitor Center's guided tour program. I had run the same route, Alum Cave to the ridge overlooking back, probably 200 times. Standard Saturday morning tour, 5 hours round trip, moderate terrain, good wildlife viewing if you are quiet and patient, which recreational hikers generally are not, and which I have learned to manage. 3 of the 4 were fine, a retired couple from Tennessee and a solo hiker in his 30s, but then came the 4th, which was a woman in a yellow fleece. I am not going to expose her name, so I'll call her the Yellow Fleece. She had arrived at the trailhead 11 minutes late with a travel mug of what she described, loudly, simply as a macchiato, a camera that cost more than my monthly salary, and the specific energy of a person who has decided that their experience of a place is the primary fact about that place. She had opinions about the pace before we had covered a quarter mile. She had opinions about the route. She had opinions voiced at a volume that will not have helped us with wildlife sighting probability about the fact that she had seen better views from a ski resort in Utah. Gerald caught my eye somewhere around the half-mile mark and gave me the small nod of a person who has also been on group activities with someone like this and is communicating solidarity across the space between them. I gave him the small nod back. We kept moving. The first sighting happened at 2 miles on the switchback below the bluffs. I saw it first because I am trained to see things first. It is the job, the continuous peripheral scan of the trail environment that becomes automatic after enough years. The registration of anything that is not where it is supposed to be before conscious attention has fully arrived at it. At the base of the bluff in the rhododendron thicket at the edge of the trail corridor, something was crouched. I stopped the group with a hand signal, the open palm behind me that means halt without sound. And I looked. It was not a bear cub. I have encountered bear cubs on this trail 7 times in 16 years, and I know what a bear cub looks like in the vegetation at various ranges and various light conditions. The proportions were not a bear cub. The head was too large relative to the body in the way infant primate heads are large relative to their bodies, not in the way bear cub heads are. The limbs were visible through the gap in the rhododendron, and limbs are where the distinction between a bear and something else becomes clear. A bear cub has 4 legs, each of which terminates in a paw, and moves in the pattern specific to bear locomotion. What was in the rhododendron at the base of the bluff had 2 arms and 2 legs. It was sitting. I am going to tell you what I thought in that first second because it matters. I thought Bigfoot. A flicker, gone before the conscious mind finished forming it, because 16 years of training tells you that word does not belong in your working vocabulary on a Saturday morning tour. I dismissed it. I went back to looking. Not crouching the way a bear crouches, the compressed 4-point readiness of a cub that is deciding whether to climb or run. Sitting, the specific seated posture of something that uses the sit as a resting position rather than as a transitional stance. Upright through the back. The weight is distributed in the way weight distributes when the legs are folded in front rather than tucked beneath. It was also, in the moment I found it, looking at something in its hands. 2 hands. I registered both of them in the second or so I had before the group reacted to the halt. 2 hands, individually articulated, holding something, a piece of bark, I thought, or a root, with the specific grip of something that holds objects for examination rather than consumption. I turned to face the group, and I was in the process of formulating a quiet instruction to remain still when the yellow fleece said, at full conversational volume, "Oh my God, it's a baby bear." It was not a baby bear. I said quietly and directly, "Do not move and do not make any additional sound." She had already taken 2 steps off the trail. I want to describe the next 90 seconds with precision because the precision is the only thing that communicates how fast this went from a sighting to a situation. The yellow fleece moved toward the rhododendron thicket with the specific confidence of someone who has seen wildlife on television and has formed conclusions about wildlife behavior from the watching of it. She was not being malicious. I want to be clear about that because what comes later requires that the distinction be made. She was not a cruel person. She was a person who had assembled an understanding of the world from sources that did not include 16 years of backcountry naturalist work, and that understanding had not equipped her for what she was currently walking toward. She had the camera raised. She was making sounds, soft, high-pitched sounds that she had apparently concluded were appropriate wildlife communication, the kind of sounds people make at cats or small dogs. She covered the 12 feet between where I had stopped the group and the edge of the rhododendron thicket in approximately 10 seconds. I was moving. I want to be clear about that. I was already in motion, reaching for her arm, already calculating the angle and the speed and what I was going to say and how I was going to get her back to the trail without triggering a defensive response from whatever was in the thicket. I was trained for this, and I was reacting with everything 16 years of training had given me. I was not fast enough. She reached through the rhododendron and she put her hand on it. I am going to describe what happened when she made contact because what happened is the part that changed my understanding of what we were looking at. It did not flee. It did not vocalize. It did not exhibit any of the startle flight responses I have observed in every other wildlife encounter where unexpected human contact has been made at close range. What it did was this. It went very still, not the freeze of a startled animal, the considered stillness of something that has registered a new variable and is deciding what to do with it. It turned its head, and the neck rotation was primate, full and lateral in a way that no bear cub manages, and it looked at the yellow fleece fleece's hand on its shoulder with the specific quality of attention that I can only describe as deliberate. Then it looked at her face. I was close enough to see the face. I was close enough that I have thought about the face every day since August and will probably keep thinking about it. It was not a bear's face, and it was not a human face, and what it most resembled, in the half second I had to register it before everything changed, was the face of something that was older than it was small. The forward-set eyes, the heavy brow, the flatness across the cheekbones, features that were assembled in a configuration that my brain kept trying to map to something in its catalog and kept failing. It looked at her face for 2 seconds. Then it made a sound, not loud. That is the first thing I need to tell you, because loud is what you expect from an animal in a threat situation. It was not loud. It was a single, short vocalization, a sound that had a pitch and a shape to it in the way sounds have shapes when they have been produced with intent. And it was not directed at the yellow fleece. It was directed away from her, into the forest above the bluff, into the uphill tree line. I understood what it was doing before I understood anything else about what it was. It was calling for something, the specific vocalization of something that is small and has encountered a situation it cannot manage on its own and is sending for the thing that manages situations it cannot manage. It was calling its mother, a baby Bigfoot calling for its mother because a stranger in a yellow fleece had just put a hand on it. I said loudly and with a clarity I do not use in normal. Trail guidance. Everyone back to the trail right now. Gerald and Maureen moved immediately. Marcus moved immediately. The yellow fleece was still looking at the thing in the rhododendron with the expression of someone who is having an experience they intend to describe to other people and is still assembling the description. I took her arm. I'm not going to describe whether she objected to that, because what came through the tree line above the bluff approximately 40 seconds later made the question irrelevant. I felt it before I heard it. That is the sequence I need you to understand. Felt, then heard, then saw. The ground vibration was first a rhythmic compression through the trail substrate that I registered through the soles of my boots before it was available to any other sense. Footfalls, bipedal from the weight distribution, the alternating heel strike of something moving on 2 points rather than 4, heavy enough that the forest floor transmitted it through 6 inches of root mat and leaf litter and into the packed earth of the trail surface. Then the sound, not a vocalization, the sound of movement through forest canopy, a very specific sound that anyone who has spent time in dense mixed hardwood knows as distinct from wind, the percussion of branches being displaced by something moving through them, rapid and purposeful, coming from the ridge above the bluff and getting closer. Then I saw it. It came through the tree line at the top of the bluff, a gap in the canopy roughly 40 feet above and 60 feet to our north, and it was not crouching, and it was not moving carefully, and it was not doing anything that resembled the measured, deliberate motion of what had been in the rhododendron. It was moving fast. I am going to give you the observation and not the embellishment, because what I am describing is an adult Bigfoot, 8 feet tall by my estimate against the canopy height, I know, broad across the shoulders in a way that the passage through the canopy registered, branches deflecting outward, not breaking, the way a pushed door deflects rather than break, because the force is distributed rather than concentrated. Dark, moving on 2 feet down the bluff face at a speed that the grade should not have permitted without a fall. It did not fall. It came down the face of that bluff the way water comes down a face. Fast, adaptive, without hesitation, finding its footing on a grade that I would have descended on hands and knees and doing it at a run. We were already moving. I had the yellow fleece by the arm, and Gerald had Maureen, and Marcus was 3 steps ahead of all of us, and the trail below us was clear, and we were moving as fast as 4 people of varying physical capacity can move down a switchback trail in hiking boots on packed earth. I want to describe the physical experience of that first stretch of running, because it is not something I had occasion to put into words until much later, and the words matter for understanding the rest of the account. The trail at that point drops in a series of tight switchbacks, packed dirt and exposed root systems, and the occasional loose stone that I know individually from 16 years of walking that same ground. I was running it the way you run a familiar staircase in the dark, not looking down, trusting the feet to find what they already know is there, because my eyes were not on the trail. My eyes were behind me and ahead of me and on the yellow fleece's arm in my hand, in a rotation that left almost nothing for the actual mechanics of running, which is a dangerous way to move quickly down a mountain trail, and which I did anyway, because the alternative was worse. The yellow fleece's camera was still around her neck, swinging hard against her chest with every stride, and at some point in those first few switchbacks, the macchiato she had been carrying since the trailhead, which she had somehow kept hold of through the entire encounter at the rhododendron, left her hand without either of us deciding it should. I do not remember seeing it fall. I remember later noticing that her hand was empty. I am going to describe what was happening behind us because I was watching it while we ran. Because watching what is behind you is what you do when what is behind you is the relevant threat. And the only way to manage a threat you cannot see is to not stop seeing it. There is a particular kind of attention that takes over in a moment like that, and I want to try to describe it because I do not think people who have not experienced it understand how it actually works. It is not panic, or at least it was not panic for me in those first several seconds. Panic is loud, and panic narrows things down to almost nothing. What I had instead was a strange widening, an awareness that seemed to be running on two tracks simultaneously, one track entirely occupied with the mechanical business of getting 4 people down a switchback trail without anyone going down on the loose stone, and a second track that was doing nothing but processing the sound coming from behind us, second by second, building a model of distance and speed out of nothing but echo and vibration, because I did not yet have the nerve to turn my head and confirm it with my eyes. It reached the base of the bluff in the time it took us to cover roughly 60 feet of trail. I know the bluff, a 40-foot near vertical face of exposed sandstone with a slope at the base extending another 15 feet at roughly 45 degrees before it meets the rhododendron zone. To descend it at any speed requires technical climbing experience or something not operating under the same gravitational constraints I do. It reached the base in under 10 seconds. I heard it before that first backward glance confirmed it. A sound somewhere between the controlled scrape of something descending loose rock with intention and the heavier percussive impact of something that does not need to control its descent because its mass and its grip make the question of control academic. Stone displaced, gravel running ahead of the movement and pattering into the rhododendron below. No cry, no roar, nothing vocal at all. Just the sound of a great deal of weight covering 40 feet of near vertical sandstone faster than I would have thought survivable, let alone fast. Then it stopped. At the base of the bluff, at the edge of the rhododendron where the juvenile was still crouched, it stopped. I saw it over my shoulder while we were running, and I registered the stop before I registered what it meant. A full stop, not a deceleration. A stop the way something stops when it has chosen to stop rather than when it has run out of momentum. Weight shifted back, both feet planted, head up, looking at us. I kept running. Gerald called something to me from behind. A question, I think, whether to stay on the trail or leave it, and I did not answer because the answer required processing. I was not going to divert resources to while running. Stay on the trail. The trail is the fastest way down. The trail is the way I know. Off the trail in the Smokies is dense rhododendron and downed timber and grade that will turn an ankle and slow you down. And slow is the thing you cannot be. We covered the next quarter mile in a time I would not have told you was possible for that group at the start of that Saturday morning. Gerald and Maureen had a decade and a half on me, and they moved with the specific urgency of people who have been told something serious and have decided to believe it. Marcus ran well. The yellow fleece ran. I want to note that. She ran. Whatever had reorganized her understanding of the situation in the 40 seconds between touching the juvenile and seeing what came down the bluff had done its job. She ran without asking questions and without the commentary about pace that had characterized the first 2 miles of the morning. I was watching the trail behind us while we ran. I am going to describe what I was seeing because the seeing of it is the part that stayed with me longer than anything else in this account. The trail corridor through that section of Alum Cave is approximately 8 feet wide, narrow enough that the rhododendron canopy meets above your head and you're moving through a tunnel of green. Behind us, through that tunnel, I could see back approximately 60 feet before the switchback cut the sight line. For the first 60 feet of our run, I could see the point where we had stopped, the rhododendron thicket, the base of the bluff. It was standing there. I caught the glimpse on the first backward glance, maybe 15 seconds into the run, a dark shape at the edge of the thicket at the bluff base, at the position where it had stopped, tall enough that it showed above the rhododendron canopy even at that distance, not moving, watching. On the second backward glance, 30 seconds in, as the switchback took the sight line away, still there, still not moving, still watching us go. I do not know what to do with those 2 glances, the watching of it, the stillness of something capable of descending a 40-foot bluff in 10 seconds, choosing instead to stand at the base of that bluff and observe 4 people running away from it. There is a quality to being watched by something that is significantly more capable than you are and is choosing not to use that capability, and the quality is not relief. Relief comes when the threat withdraws. This was something else. This was the feeling of being assessed from a position of complete advantage by something that has decided you do not require its full attention. I have spent 16 years in the backcountry of this park. I have been in situations with bears that required me to be afraid, and I know what that fear feels like. The immediate animal response to immediate animal threat. What I felt while running that switchback with those glances over my shoulder was a different quality entirely. Not the fear of being in danger, the fear of having understood something about your own position in a hierarchy that you had previously not known you were part of. At the half-mile mark, I looked back down the trail. The trail behind us was empty. No movement in the tree line on either side. No ground vibration through my boots. No sound from the canopy above the trail corridor. I did not slow down. At the quarter-mile mark, I looked back again. Still empty. Still nothing. The trail was just the trail, and the forest on both sides of it was just the forest, and we were the only thing moving on it. We came out of the tree line at the trailhead at a pace that earned us several looks from the day hikers who were starting their morning at the parking area. I did not stop at the trailhead. I moved the group to the vehicles, and I stood with my back to the group and my eyes on the trail entrance and my radio in my hand, and I watched for 4 minutes. Nothing came out. I put the group in my vehicle, and I drove them to the visitor center, and I sat with them for 20 minutes while the adrenaline cleared to the point where useful conversation was possible. Maureen had a small cut on her palm from a branch she had caught on the run. Gerald was breathing steadily and said nothing for the first 10 minutes, and then said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "I have never seen anything move like that." I want to describe what the 4 of us looked like in that parking lot, because it matters, and because it is not the part of an account like this that usually gets told. Maureen's hands would not stop, not shaking exactly. A finer thing than shaking, a continuous low-amplitude tremor in both hands that she kept trying to suppress by pressing her palms flat against her thighs, and that kept returning the moment she stopped pressing. She noticed me notice it, and she said, almost apologetically, "It'll pass in a minute," the way a person describes a symptom they have cataloged before and are managing rather than panicking about. It did not pass in a minute. It was still there at the 8-minute mark when I checked again without meaning to make it obvious that I was checking. Marcus had gone quiet in a different register than his usual quiet. He had been a measured observational presence for the first 2 miles of the hike, the kind of hiker who asks good questions and listens to the answers. In the parking lot, he stood with his weight on the balls of his feet, angled very slightly toward the trailhead, in the specific stance of someone whose body has not yet been informed by the rest of him that the running is over. I watched him do it 3 separate times, a half step toward the tree line, caught and reversed, as if some part of his nervous system was still tracking a threat his conscious mind had filed as past tense. My own hands were fine. That is not bravery. It is a function of having had this particular reaction before, in other contexts, and having learned what my body does with adrenaline, it has not been given anywhere to put. What I had instead was the inability to stop checking the tree line. I would look at Maureen, look at my radio, look at the group, and the eyes would slide back to the gap in the canopy at the head of the trail before I had finished a thought, and I would have to consciously redirect them, and a few seconds later they would slide back again. The yellow fleece had not moved from where she'd stopped walking, 8 or so feet from the rest of us, and she had her arms wrapped around herself in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her breathing was the loudest thing in the parking lot for a while, fast, shallow, audible. And then, gradually, over a couple of minutes, it slowed into something closer to normal, and I watched that happen the way you watch a kettle stop boiling, with a kind of relief that has no particular satisfaction in it, just the absence of one more thing to monitor. None of us talked for those first several minutes. There is a specific quality to the silence after a shared threat that I have encountered exactly twice before in 16 years of this work, and it is not an empty silence. It is a silence with all 4 people in it at once, each person running the same 90 seconds back through their own memory at their own speed, arriving at slightly different frames, and none of them ready yet to compare notes. Marcus asked me, directly and without the kind of preamble that people use when they think the question might sound crazy, "What was it?" I told him I didn't know. That was not entirely honest. I had 16 years of catalog entries, and what had come down that bluff was not in any of them. I knew the silhouette. I knew the reports. Anyone who has worked this park long enough knows the reports, the accounts filed over decades, the ones that get logged and quietly closed. I knew the word that fit, and the word was Bigfoot. I was not going to say it in front of 4 people in a parking lot at a National Park Visitor Center. The yellow fleece had not said anything for the entire drive and the entire 20 minutes at the visitor center. She was looking at her hands, which were in her lap, and she had the specific expression of someone who is replaying a sequence of events and arriving at different conclusions on each pass. The camera was still around her neck. I do not know if she had gotten any photographs. I did not ask. Finally, she said, "I thought it was a bear." I said, "I know." She said, "I could have," and then she stopped. I said, "Yes?" She said, "Is it still out there?" I said, "Yes." She looked at the tree line at the edge of the parking lot, the place where the maintained ground of the visitor center met the beginning of the park's interior, the wall of mixed hardwood that starts where the mowed grass ends, and she looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry." I believed her. I want to be clear about that too, because everything else in this account requires it. She had done something profoundly dangerous, and she had done it from ignorance rather than malice. And she knew it now, and the knowing of it was visible in her face in the way that genuine realization is visible. Not the performance of remorse, but the real thing. The specific look of someone who has just understood at a physical level what the word consequence means. I filed a report that afternoon, a standard wildlife encounter report, the form used for bear interactions and coyote sightings and the occasional elk confrontation in the campground areas. I filled in the fields with language that I calibrated to be accurate without being specific. Unusual large primate, undetermined species, possible defensive response to contact with juvenile, rapid descent of approximately 40-foot bluff, no injuries sustained. Group evacuated successfully. My supervisor read it the following Monday and called me into his office and asked me to walk him through the encounter in more detail. And I did, and he listened without expression until I was finished. And then he said, "I'm going to need you to revise the species classification on this to unknown bear interaction." I asked him why. He said, "Because that's the classification that closes cleanly." I looked at him for a moment. He did not look away. He has been with the Park Service for 23 years, and he is not an unintelligent man, and he was not telling me he did not believe me. He was telling me something else entirely. He was telling me that what I had seen was a Bigfoot, that the Park Service had a policy about Bigfoot, and that the policy was not acknowledged. I revised the report. Unknown bear interaction. Filed, reviewed, closed. I have thought about what I saw on that bluff every day since August. The speed of the descent, the planted stop at the base, the moment when it looked at us over the distance of the trail and did not come after us. That last part. I have run wildlife encounters for 16 years, and I know the threat assessment behavior of every large predator this park supports. I know what pursuit looks like, and I know what warning looks like, and I know the specific difference between an animal that has decided you are a threat to be eliminated and an animal that has decided you are a threat to be moved. Black bears bluff charge. They make noise. They escalate in a sequence designed to give the intruder every possible opportunity to leave before contact occurs. What stopped at the base of that bluff and looked at us was not bluff charging. It was not making noise. It was not going through a sequence designed to give us an opportunity. It was looking at us. For the 3 or 4 seconds that I was watching it over my shoulder while we ran, it was standing at the edge of the rhododendron with the juvenile behind it, and it was watching us leave with the specific attention of something that has assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion. Not anger in the way an animal is angry, the immediate reactive escalation of a threatened predator. Something slower than that. Something that had more information in it. I think it knew we were leaving. I think it had assessed the group, 4 people, no weapons, all moving away at their best available speed, and determined that pursuit was not necessary, that we were not a threat that required anything beyond the demonstration that it was present and capable, that the demonstration had been sufficient. The demonstration was sufficient. I do not go above the switchback below the bluffs alone anymore. I run the Alum Cave route 3 or 4 times a month, and every time I pass the 2-mile mark and the rhododendron zone comes into view, I do a specific thing. I stop the group before we enter it. I tell them we are going to move quietly through this section. I tell them there is sometimes bear activity in the thicket, and I need them to stay on the trail and follow my instructions without delay. That is not a lie. It is a category adjustment. The Bigfoot that may be in that thicket is bear adjacent in the sense that it is large, it is wild, and contact with it is not compatible with your continued well-being. The specifics are my business. I find that more frightening than the alternative. My knees were screaming before I even reached the ridge that morning, the old arthritis grinding like wet gravel with every step, and the rain kept coming down in that fine Pacific Northwest drizzle that soaks through denim without ever looking like much. I had my walking stick in one hand and my thermos in the other, and I remember thinking the forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the Douglas firs, just my own breath, ragged and old, fogging in front of my face. I told myself it was the weather. I told myself a lot of things that morning that turned out to be wrong. I rounded a boulder slick with moss, easily 8 feet across, and stopped so fast my walking stick nearly went out from under me. In a hollow log, maybe 20 yards off the trail, 2 small shapes huddled together, whimpering like abandoned puppies. They stood about 3 feet tall, covered head to toe in wet brown fur, and one of them had a gash along its forearm that wept dark blood into the moss. My first thought was orphaned bear cubs. My second thought, the one that made my stomach drop, was that bears don't have hands like that and bears don't have faces like that. These were baby Bigfoot, and somewhere deep in my chest I already knew it before my mind caught up. I should have turned around right then. 40 years living at the edge of that mountain, and I'd heard every story a person could hear about Bigfoot, the kind old-timers tell after too much coffee, and not one of those stories ended well for the fool who got close. But the injured baby Bigfoot let out a high, keening wail that cut straight through me, and something in my chest just gave. I eased forward with my hands open, murmuring the same nonsense I used on frightened barn cats. The two of them recoiled at first, pressing into the rotted wood, but the hurt one kept crying, and eventually I had my emergency blanket around them both, and they went still and quiet in my arms like the fight had drained clean out of them. I carried them down the mountain, one under each arm, my bad knee screaming with every downhill step, rain running off my hood and down my collar. Halfway to the truck, I felt it, that prickling on the back of my neck that every person who has spent real time in the woods learns to trust. I looked upslope through the dripping cedars and caught a shape, dark and enormous, moving between the trunks 100 yards off, gone before I could be sure I'd seen it. Old woman's imagination, I told myself, and kept walking, though I walked faster than my knees wanted to allow. I know now it wasn't imagination at all. It was the first look Bigfoot ever got of me. I loaded the babies into the bench seat of my pickup, wrapped tight, still whimpering low in their throats, and I checked the rearview mirror before I pulled onto the gravel road. Nothing there, just wet trees and the gray wall of the ridge behind me. But as I turned onto the county road, I watched a branch shudder at the tree line where there was no wind to shake it, and somewhere in those woods, a massive hand, fur-covered and thick-fingered as a fence post, closed around a pine trunk and squeezed until the bark split and rained down in splinters. I didn't see that happen. I only understood, driving home with 2 frightened Bigfoot babies pressed against my hip, that something enormous had watched me take them, and that something enormous was not going to let that go. My cabin sits at the edge of the mountain, log built, isolated, the nearest neighbor 4 miles off through timber that doesn't quit. Timber thick enough that no one would hear a single shout for help, even on a still night, let alone one drowned out by rain and the roar of Bigfoot. I'd lived there alone since my husband passed, and I liked the quiet well enough most days. That afternoon, I laid the babies on towels across my kitchen table and cleaned the gash on the injured one's arm with peroxide and gauze, the way I'd patched up 100 stray dogs over the years. They were docile under my hands, almost trusting, and the healthy one nuzzled my palm with something that felt disturbingly close to affection. But their eyes were wrong for animals. Too deep, too aware, tracking my every movement like they understood exactly what I was doing and were deciding in real time whether to let me. What have I done? I thought, looking at those small, knowing faces. These are not apes. I had brought something into my house that the forest wanted back, and the forest, I would soon learn, was not in the habit of asking twice. The roar came an hour later, a single thunderous blast that shook the window panes in their frames and rattled the plates in my cupboard. I froze at the sink with a dish towel still in my hand. Both baby Bigfoot perked up on the table, ears pricked, and the healthy one let out an excited little squeal, like a child hearing its mother's car pull into the drive. I crept to the front window and eased the blinds apart with 2 fingers, and what I saw out there took the strength clean out of my legs. A 9-foot female emerged from the tree line, her fur matted with rain, old scars crossing her torso in pale ridges, and her eyes, a deep and ancient yellow, fixed on my cabin like she could see straight through the log walls to the babies inside. I would come to think of her as the matriarch, because there was no other word for the way the rest of them arranged themselves around her. Behind her came an 8.5-foot male, broader through the shoulders than any grizzly I'd ever seen, blind in one eye, the socket clouded and pale. 3 more males fanned out behind him, moving without a sound despite their size, which is a thing about Bigfoot that nobody tells you until you've lived it. Something that big should not be able to move that quietly. The matriarch reared up and pounded her chest, 3 heavy blows that I felt in the floorboards under my feet. Boom, boom, boom. And somewhere behind me, the babies started to cry in unison, a high, wavering sound that seemed to answer her call. I counted the shapes at the tree line again, hoping I'd miscounted the first time. 5, counting the matriarch, and their faces were not the faces of animals working on instinct. There was judgment in them and something colder than anger. I had stolen from Bigfoot, whether I meant to or not, and Bigfoot had come to collect. The blind-eyed male broke from the group first, moving sideways along the edge of the clearing, circling my cabin at a walk that cracked branches under each footfall. He passed out of sight behind the woodshed, and for a long moment there was nothing but rain on the roof and my own heartbeat slamming in my ears. Then the whole back wall of the cabin took a hit that sounded like a car crash, a heavy body slamming full force into the logs, and the babies on my table screamed loud enough to hurt my ears. I understood then that this was not going to be a standoff. Bigfoot had come to take the house apart. I backed away from the window with my heart hammering and my dish towel still clenched uselessly in one fist, and I made myself count the shapes again through the gap in the blinds, because some stubborn part of me refused to believe 5 full-grown Bigfoot could stand at the edge of my own yard in broad daylight. The 3 other males held back near the tree line, swaying slightly on their feet, watching the cabin the way hunting dogs watch a rabbit hole, patient and utterly certain of the outcome. One of them dropped low and put his face to the mud, following some invisible line straight toward my porch steps, and I realized with a jolt that Bigfoot could track my scent as easily as any bloodhound, which meant there was no corner of that cabin where I would ever truly be hidden from them. I went for the fireplace poker in one hand and my late husband's shotgun in the other, moving room to check every window, my pulse a hard drum in my throat. Through the kitchen ceiling I heard footsteps that did not belong on a roof, heavy and deliberate, and a moment later shingles began to tear away in long strips, wood splintering, gray daylight pouring down through a widening hole above the hallway. I put the shotgun barrel up through the gap and fired once, the blast deafening in that enclosed space, and Bigfoot answered with a roar that shook dust from the rafters, not wounded, just furious. An arm the size of a fence post punched down through the broken lath, fur soaked black with rain, claws raking across the floorboards inches from my boot, and I scrambled backward toward the basement stairs with the babies clutched against my chest. I got the basement door bolted behind me just as something heavy hit it, hard enough to buckle the frame. Splinters raining down over my shoulders in the dark, and I pressed my spine against the far wall with the babies gathered tight to my chest, counting my own heartbeats just to have something steady to hold on to. I understood, crouched there in the dark with 2 frightened Bigfoot babies shaking against my ribs, that they weren't trying to break in through any single point. They were dismantling the whole structure, piece by piece, patient as a demolition crew, like they were unwrapping a gift they already knew was theirs, and no amount of bolted doors was going to change that plan. I didn't stay in that basement long because I could hear the matriarch working the living room window above me, and something told me she wasn't done being polite. Through the gap under the door, I watched her shadow cross the glass, and instead of smashing straight through, she tapped it, one long claw against the pane. Tap, 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 almost gentle, almost curious, before dragging that same claw down the length of the glass in a shriek that set my teeth on edge. A deep gouge carved clean through the pane. Her yellow eyes found mine through the crack in the blinds, and for one strange second, her head tilted, an almost human gesture of curiosity, before the rage came back into her face and she drove her skull straight through the window. Glass exploded across my kitchen floor. I fired the shotgun again, and she ducked back out of sight into the rain. But I knew Bigfoot did not retreat, she only repositioned. I hauled the babies into the bathroom, the smallest room in the house, and threw the bolt, listening to scratching sounds that weren't coming from the walls at all, but from somewhere lower, at the foundation itself. Concrete groaned under claws. The whole cabin shifted, tilted maybe 2 degrees, enough that a bottle of shampoo slid off the sink and clattered into the tub where I'd laid the babies. They were digging under us, undermining the foundation, turning my own house into a trap that would collapse on its own timeline. A fist the size of a Thanksgiving ham punched clean through the drywall beside me, and the blind-eyed male's pale, clouded eye stared through the hole, while his good eye locked onto the babies in the tub. I drove the fireplace poker into the back of his hand as hard as my old arms could manage, and he wrenched free with a bellow that rattled the medicine cabinet. But I knew that reprieve wouldn't last, not with Bigfoot circling a house that was already coming apart under me. I kicked out the bathroom window and dropped into the mud with a baby under each arm, rain coming down in sheets now, cold enough to steal my breath. My truck sat 30 yards off across open ground, and I ran for it harder than I'd run in 20 years, my bad knee screaming with every stride. Behind me, the front door exploded outward in a spray of splintered wood as the blind-eyed male came through it at a dead run, and I understood in that instant that Bigfoot was not going to let me reach that truck without a fight. I threw the babies onto the bench seat and slammed the door, and my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys twice before the engine turned over, sputtered, died, and finally caught on the third try. I threw it into reverse, tires spinning uselessly in the mud, the truck fishtailing sideways, and 2 more males broke from the tree line and landed on the bed with a crash that bottomed out the suspension, their claws screeching across the roof of the cab like fingernails on slate. Bigfoot was on top of my truck, and I could feel every pound of that weight through the steering wheel, and I understood they would peel that cab open like a tin can if I gave them one more second to work. One of the males on the bed leaned forward and drove a fist straight through the rear window, glass spraying across the babies where they crouched on the bench seat, and I felt his fingers close around the headrest, not 6 inches from my shoulder, close enough that I could smell wet fur and something like rotten pine sap rolling off him in waves. I swung the wheel hard right and then hard left, fighting the fishtail, praying the mud would hold the tires long enough to shake him loose, and for one endless second, the whole cab tipped up on 2 wheels before slamming back down with a jolt that cracked my teeth together. Bigfoot did not let go easily. I threw the truck into drive and rammed the nearest pine at 10 miles an hour, hard enough that both males flew clear off the bed, one rolling into the brush, the other cracking his shoulder against the trunk with a sound like a gunshot. I shifted again and floored it, tires screaming against wet gravel, and that was when the blind-eyed male stepped directly into my path, arms spread wide, chest out, daring me. I did not slow down. I hit him square at 30 miles an hour, the bumper crumpling like foil, his body sliding up across the hood, his face slamming into my windshield, hard enough to spiderweb the glass and smear it with blood and matted fur before he rolled off into the ditch behind me. Limbs tangled, one arm bent at an angle that should have ended him right there. Bigfoot was down, but Bigfoot was not finished, not by a long shot, and some part of me already knew that. I swerved to avoid his rolling body, and the front tire caught the edge of the ditch, and the truck went over onto its side in a grinding shriek of metal, throwing me hard against the seatbelt while the babies tumbled into my lap, shrieking. I cut myself loose with the pocket knife I keep in my jacket and crawled out through the shattered passenger window into rain that came down like it meant to drown the whole mountain. And when I got my feet under me and looked up, the blind-eyed male was already rising from the ditch 50 yards off, shaking the impact off like a bad cough, his one good eye locked dead on me. My truck was finished. The ranger station was 3 miles off through open, exposed ground, and I understood with a cold certainty that Bigfoot would run me down before I made it a quarter of that distance. The only cover left was the cabin, half wrecked as it was, so I turned and crawled back toward it, through the mud with the babies dragging against my chest, and up on the roofline the matriarch crouched in the downpour, silent, dripping, her yellow eyes tracking my every inch of progress. Inside, the cabin was a total blackout, my flashlight dead in my pocket, and I felt my way along walls slick with rainwater, the babies whimpering against my collarbone. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard breathing that was not mine, low and wet and guttural, close enough that I pressed my spine flat against the wall and held my own breath. An arm punched through the drywall inches from my temple, claws hooking deep into the studs, and I dropped low and scrambled under the dining table just as a second male crashed down through the collapsed ceiling above, landing square on the tabletop and crushing it flat, splinters raining across my back. I rolled clear and kicked out at his shin with everything I had left, and he roared but didn't go down, swiping blind through the dark until I ducked beneath his swinging arm and slid between his legs into the kitchen. Bigfoot could see in that dark. I could not, and that difference was going to get me killed if I didn't find an edge fast. I pressed myself into the gap behind the refrigerator, babies clamped tight against my ribs, and listened to that same male stalk the length of the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps. His breathing wet and heavy, close enough now that I could feel warm air pushing against the back of my neck each time he exhaled. A drawer somewhere near his feet rattled shut on its own, some vibration passing through the floor from the damage upstairs, and he spun toward the sound so fast the whole refrigerator groaned against the wall behind me. I understood then that Bigfoot was not simply chasing blind through the dark, he was reading the house itself, every creak and shift, hunting me by sound alone, and the moment I gave him one more, he would have me. I remembered the babies flinched every time the adults grew too rough, so I squeezed one small foot hard enough to make it wail, and the male chasing me froze mid-stride, sniffed the air, and stepped back like he'd been struck. I used that half second to scramble for the stove, twisted the propane valve wide open, and heard the hiss fill the ruined kitchen while I fumbled a lighter out of the junk drawer, with fingers gone numb from cold. The blind-eyed male came through the kitchen wall like a freight train, his forearms smashing my counter to ceramic shards, one massive hand closing around my ankle and dragging me across broken glass before I twisted and drove my heels straight into his ruined eye. He recoiled with a bellow and let go, and I rolled clear, sparked the lighter, and the propane cloud went up with a whoomph that turned the whole kitchen into a fireball. Bigfoot scattered in every direction, fur singeing, the blind-eyed male slapping at his own smoking chest as he stumbled backward out of the flames. I used that flash of light and confusion to run for the living room, but the floor gave way beneath me without warning, rotted boards splintering, my leg plunging through to the thigh, the babies spilling from my arms and skittering across what planks remained. The matriarch's face filled the shattered window frame above me, and her clawed hand shot through and closed around my trapped leg, squeezing until I felt something give with a sick, grinding crack. She was going to pull me straight through the floor and tear me in half doing it, Bigfoot patient as stone even now, and I grabbed a length of pipe from the wreckage and drove it into her wrist as hard as I could manage. She shrieked and released me, and I dragged my ruined leg free, blood soaking through my jeans, scooped up the babies, and the weakened floor gave out entirely beneath us, dropping all three of us into the basement below. Down there, the air smelled of wet concrete and scorched wire, a single bare bulb flickering overhead, rainwater pooling across the floor from the wreckage above. My leg throbbed with a pain that told me something in it had broken for real this time. But I held the babies close and listened, and what I heard chilled me worse than anything Bigfoot had done to me yet. Scratching, not above, but below. Claws working against the underside of the concrete slab itself, clawing upward. They had tunneled beneath the house, and there was nowhere left to run that Bigfoot hadn't already accounted for. The blind-eyed male dropped through the ceiling hole 10 feet away, blackened and burned, but still filling the room with his shoulders, and at the same instant, the matriarch's arm punched clean through the concrete floor by my feet and closed around my boot. I kicked free and scrambled up a metal shelving unit, dust and old paint cans raining down around me, and the male swiped the whole shelf out from under me. I fell and landed hard across his back, driving a rusted nail into his shoulder with everything my old arms had left, and he bucked me clean into the wall, while the matriarch's second arm broke through the concrete beside the first, both limbs now buried to the elbow, clawing and searching blindly for the babies I'd hidden behind a stack of paint cans. I saw the fuse box on the far wall and understood, in the way you understand things only when your life depends on it, exactly what I had to do. I ripped the main breaker, killing every light in the house, sparks spitting from the exposed wiring where the storm had already chewed through the insulation, and I wrapped a dry rag around the live wires and jammed them straight into the puddle where the matriarch's arms were still reaching. 240 volts tore through the standing water, and Bigfoot screamed like nothing I had ever heard in my life, her arms spasming and wrenching back through the hole, the blind-eyed male shuddering where he stood, stunned, rigid by the current running through the wet floor beneath his feet. The blind-eyed male staggered where he stood, one hand braced against the wall to keep himself upright, and for a moment his good eye rolled toward me with something almost like confusion, like he could not quite believe a woman my age had done that to him. It didn't last. I watched his knees firm up under him and his fingers curl again, and I knew whatever window I'd bought myself with that jolt of current was closing fast, because Bigfoot recovered from pain far quicker than any creature had a right to. I didn't wait to see if either of them recovered fully. I grabbed the babies, climbed the fallen shelving like a ladder, and hauled myself back up into what was left of the living room, my broken legs screaming with every movement. I crawled toward the shattered front opening through mud and rain that showed no sign of easing, and when I reached the threshold, I saw the last two males waiting out in the yard, pacing in a slow, deliberate circle. They weren't charging, they were herding, driving me back inside the way a sheepdog works a flock. And I understood then that Bigfoot wasn't hunting me anymore so much as wearing me down on purpose, letting exhaustion do the work that claws hadn't. Finished. I stopped fighting it. I collapsed onto the ruined, mud-soaked porch with the babies still cradled against me, closed my eyes, and held them out in front of me, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. The two circling males stepped closer, sniffing at the air, and then, strangely, they stopped and parted. The matriarch climbed up out of the basement hole behind me, soaked through, still steaming faintly from the electric burn, and she did not grab for my throat the way every instinct told me she would. She only stared and waited, and something about that stillness frightened me worse than the violence had. Whatever pause that was, it broke fast, and Bigfoot came back at the house with a fury that made everything before it look like a warm-up. The males tore the chimney apart brick by brick, hurling them into the yard with enough force that one shattered a fence post 40 feet off. The blind-eyed male ripped floorboards up from beneath the wreckage in great splintering handfuls, tossing them aside like a man clearing brush, working his way steadily toward the corner where I'd retreated with the babies. The matriarch tore the power meter clean off its mount in a shower of sparks, plunging what little light remained into full darkness, and somewhere behind her I heard glass grinding under a heavy foot, slow and unhurried, the sound of something that already knew it had won and simply wanted to finish the job properly. All four of them together wrenched the front door frame free of the wall, nails screeching out of old wood, and I heard support beams crack somewhere overhead, the whole structure groaning like a dying animal as walls buckled inward around me. Dust and wet insulation rained down over my shoulders, and a ceiling joist gave way not 10 feet from where I crouched, crashing through what remained of the kitchen table in an explosion of splinters. I backed into the last standing corner of my own home with an empty shotgun and a bent poker and two shaking Bigfoot babies in my lap, and I understood there was no more house left to retreat into, only this last square of standing floor and whatever came through the dark to claim it. I had nothing left to fight with, only surrender. I got to my feet anyway, because staying still felt like dying twice, and I carried those two babies out through the collapsed doorway into the open yard, with the rain lashing sideways across my face, holding them up in front of me like a shield, the only bargaining chip I had left against Bigfoot. The three remaining males stopped their tearing all at once, heads swiveling toward me in the same instant, and for a long, terrible breath, none of them moved at all, the whole ruined yard gone still, except for the rain hammering down on splintered wood. The matriarch crouched low, coiled, and lunged before I could brace, one massive hand closing around my throat and lifting me clean off the ground, my boots kicking uselessly at empty air while the babies slipped from my failing grip and tumbled into the mud below. Her grip tightened with every second, and through the roaring in my ears, I heard the blind-eyed male bark something low and guttural, a sound that carried more weight than any roar had all night. Then he crossed the distance in 2 strides and seized her arm, forcing her fingers open around my throat in a raw contest of strength that shook the ground beneath us both. The two of them locked chest to chest, snarling into each other's faces while I collapsed in a heap between their feet, coughing, unable to draw a full breath. I dropped hard into the mud, choking, gasping, watching Bigfoot fight Bigfoot over what was left of me, and for one wild second I thought the whole pack might turn on itself and tear each other apart right there over my body. The matriarch finally backed off, gathering the babies against her chest with a gentleness that struck me as almost obscene given everything that had come before it, and the blind-eyed male stood over me a moment longer, staring down with that one clouded eye before he gave a single slow nod and melted backward into the tree line with the rest of them, the whole pack of Bigfoot vanishing into the dark timber as silently as they had first arrived. I lay there in the mud a long time after they were gone, my ribs cracked, my leg useless beneath me, the cabin nothing but a gutted skeleton behind me in the rain, every wall stripped bare down to the studs by hands that had wanted their own back and finally gotten it. My hearing was still ringing from the matriarch's grip, and my throat throbbed with every swallow, but somewhere under all that pain, I understood I was alive, and that Bigfoot had chosen in the end to leave me that way. I crawled to my overturned truck, hauled myself through the broken window inch by agonizing inch, and by some mercy, the engine caught on the first try, sputtering to life under a hood already crumpled from the impact hours before. I drove away from that mountain as fast as the wrecked frame would carry me, headlights cutting a thin, useless beam through the downpour. And in the rearview mirror, I watched a dark shape move once more between the trees, always following, always watching, until the road finally bent away from the ridge and the forest, and Bigfoot with it let me go. My name is Owen Haskell. I am 53 years old. I have farmed a 240-acre property in rural Garrett County, Maryland for 22 years. I am telling you this because what happened on my property over the better part of a year did not stay one kind of problem. It started as a question about my cattle. It became a question about what was watching my cameras. And it ended as a question I still do not have a comfortable answer to about why something that size would spend 11 months making sure nothing came near my fence line that wasn't already supposed to be there. I run a herd of 43 commercial beef cattle on the lower pasture. The pasture is bordered on the south and west by a timber stand, mixed hardwood, predominantly oak and maple, with a creek bottom that runs along the western edge before it joins the main branch of the Yogiagani drainage. The timber stand borders state forest on the south, which means the property backs up to contiguous woodland that runs without significant break for better than 30 miles toward the Pennsylvania line. I mention the scale of it because it matters for what comes later. This is not a property where you can walk the whole perimeter in an afternoon and call it checked. It takes most of a day to walk the boundary on foot, longer if you are stopping to look at anything, and there is more forest on the other side of my fence than there is farm on this side of it. In the first week of April, the cattle started behaving strangely at night. I know my cattle, 22 years of this operation, and I know what normal night behavior looks like in that herd. The distribution pattern across the pasture, the loose clustering that happens in cold weather, the specific alignment of the herd when a coyote is working the fence. I know the sound a spooked herd makes, and I know the sound of a herd that has settled for the night. These are things you learn because not knowing them costs you calves. The first week of April, I started getting up at 2 and 3 in the morning to the sound of cattle that were not settled. It is a specific sound, and I want to describe it because the description matters later. Not bawling, not the short, sharp distress call a cow makes when a calf has gotten separated, and not the steady, low murmuring that passes between a herd settled comfortably for the night. It was somewhere between those two, an intermittent, low-register sound moving through several animals at once, the kind of sound a herd makes when it has noticed something and is checking with each other about it, rather than reacting to it. I would lie in bed and listen to it start, build for 10 or 15 minutes, and then taper off into something closer to normal. And in the morning, I would walk the pasture and find nothing. No torn fence, no blood, no missing animal, nothing disturbed in the grass that I could point to as a cause. Not in a panic, no running, no fence testing, no vocalization beyond the specific low disturbance sound a herd makes when something has interrupted their rest without triggering full flight response. Something was near the herd at night, and the herd knew it was there and was managing its awareness of it, the way prey animals manage awareness of a presence that they have assessed as present but not yet actively threatening. I put a camera on the south fence line on April 9th. The first capture I want to tell you about came on April 14th, 4:22 in the morning. The camera is positioned at the corner post of the south pasture fence, aimed southwest along the fence line into the timber margin. It is a Browning Strike Force, 12 megapixel, infrared trigger, the same unit I have been running at that position for 4 years. At 4:22 on April 14th, something walked along the timber margin from west to east. The camera captured 9 frames across approximately 6 seconds of motion. In those 9 frames, I can see the following. A figure moving upright, not upright in the occasional bipedal posture that a bear adopts, the specific, temporary uprightness of a bear that has risen for a better view of something, and will return to 4 limbs when it is satisfied. Upright in the sustained, default posture way that something walks upright that walks upright all the time. The stride pattern across 9 frames confirms this: the footfall spacing, the arm swing, the head position. This is not an animal that has stood up. This is an animal that walks this way. The height, estimated against the fence post at the right edge of the frame, a post I have measured, 5 feet 6 inches to the top rail, is approximately 8 feet. The shoulder width in the closest frame is the width of 2 of those fence posts, side by side. I sat in my kitchen and looked at those 9 frames on my laptop for a long time. I am going to say the word I was thinking because this account is not served by dancing around it. I was thinking about Bigfoot, 8 feet tall, upright, wide at the shoulder, walking a fence line at 4 in the morning in western Maryland. 22 years on this property, and I had never thought that word about anything I encountered here before that night. I was thinking about it then. Then I pulled the SD cards from the other 7 cameras. Of the 8 cameras on the property at that time, 5 had captured from the same night, a 4-hour window between midnight and 4:30 in the morning, April 14th. 5 separate camera positions across 240 acres, each capturing the same figure or a figure of the same description at different locations on the property. I want to be precise about the implication of that because the implication is significant. In 4 hours, between midnight and 4:30 in the morning, something had moved through or around my entire property, not past it, through it. From the north woodlot to the south pasture fence to the east equipment shed to the creek bottom on the west, 5 separate camera captures across the full extent of 240 acres in 4 hours at what the timestamps suggest was a circuit. It had walked my entire farm. I did not call anyone. I am going to be honest about this throughout this account because the decisions I made and did not make are part of the story. I did not call the county sheriff. I did not call the Wildlife Management Division. I did not call my nearest neighbor, who is 3/4 of a mile up the road, because any of those calls required me to describe what I had photographed, and describing what I had photographed in terms that would produce a useful response was not something I could do. I ran the conversation forward in my head more than once. What I would say, how it would be received, what would happen to the rest of my season once that word was attached to my name and my address in any official capacity. And every version of that conversation ended the same way, with me looking like a man who needed help that had nothing to do with wildlife. I added 2 cameras and kept the SD cards, and over the next 3 months, I built the kind of record I know how to build, because building a record of something that moves through your land is the only skill I had that applied to this situation. It visited the property on 41 of the 92 nights between May and the end of July. Not every night, roughly every 2 to 3 nights, with occasional gaps followed by clusters of consecutive visits. The approach route was consistent: south timber margin, northeast along the creek bottom, across the lower pasture, to the equipment shed and the barn. The cattle pasture was accessed on every visit, and I want to be specific about what that access looked like because it is not what I expected to find when I first pulled those cards. It did not approach the herd the way a predator approaches a herd. No stalking posture, no low profile, none of the patient closing distance I have watched coyotes use on this same ground. It walked the perimeter of where the cattle were bedded, at a distance that never closed past maybe 40 feet, the way you might walk the edge of something you are keeping an eye on rather than something you intend to take from. The herd, for its part, stopped reacting to it within the first 2 weeks of May. By June, the cattle nearest its usual path would lift their heads, track it for a few seconds, and put their heads back down, the specific low-grade acknowledgement they give to something familiar and not currently relevant. The equipment shed was investigated at close range on 27 of the 41 visits. On 14 visits, the back porch camera caught it at the edge of the yard, never closer than 60 feet from the house. Looking at it, 14 nights, something 8 feet tall stood at the edge of my backyard and looked at my house. By the 6th visit to the shed, the behavior had changed from investigative to specific. The first several visits to the shed had been what I would describe as a kind of mapping, moving along the wall, pausing at the corners, at the equipment door, at each window, the pattern of something, learning a structure's layout rather than looking for anything in particular. By the 6th visit, that mapping was finished. It went directly to the east-facing window, the one I left cracked for ventilation, the one with my police scanner mounted 6 feet inside it, which I have run continuously for 15 years as part of the general security awareness for the property, and stood there for 11 minutes, not moving, not investigating anything else about the shed. 11 minutes at a window with a sound coming out of it, the scanner running through county emergency traffic the way it runs every night of the year. I turned the scanner off. On the next visit, it stopped at the window for 90 seconds, the time I think it took to confirm the sound was gone, and moved on to the barn. I turned the scanner back on. On the visit after that, it went straight back to the window. I am not going to tell you what I concluded from that sequence because I expect you have already concluded it yourself. In August, it found the cameras, not all at once. Over about 3 weeks, one by one, each camera position was identified and handled differently than the last, and I have enough footage from those discoveries that I can describe the process rather than just the result. The south fence camera was first, on August 3rd. The approach was the same as always up to that point, along the timber margin, the familiar gate, except that it stopped at the corner post instead of passing it. It stood there for a moment, and then it leaned in toward the camera housing, close enough that the lens distorts the proportions of its face in the frame, close enough that the infrared caught its face clearly enough that I have spent more hours than I want to admit looking at those frames. It held that position for nearly 30 seconds, not pawing at the unit, not trying to dislodge it, looking into it, the way you look into something when you are trying to work out what it is rather than whether you can break it. Forward set eyes, a broad, flat nose, wide cheekbones, a heavy, continuous brow ridge, dark hair covering the face the way a beard covers a face, except finer and more complete, running up past the cheekbones with no bare skin showing anywhere I could identify. And in the frames where the infrared catches the eye shine at the right angle, it is not looking in the direction of the camera, it is looking into it. There is a specific difference between an animal orienting toward a stimulus and an animal looking at a thing because it has identified the thing as something that does what this thing does, and I have spent a long time trying to talk myself out of seeing that difference in those frames, and I have not managed it. Within 3 weeks, every camera on the property had been repositioned. Not damaged, repositioned. The south fence camera pointed straight up at the sky, canopy and cloud, nothing useful in the frame. The east shed camera aimed at 4 inches of wall, then the creek bottom unit, then the north woodlot, then the equipment door. Each one lifted from its mount with no sign of damage, angled to capture nothing useful, and replaced. It had disabled my entire surveillance array without breaking a single piece of equipment, and it had done it with enough care that the only evidence of handling was the new angle. I want to be specific about what that means because it is the detail that moved this, for me, from unsettling into something closer to frightening. Disabling a camera by force is easy and leaves evidence: a cracked housing, a torn strap, a dislodged bracket. What I found instead, 5 times, was equipment that had been lifted clear of its mount, turned with a controlled and deliberate motion, and set back down with enough precision that nothing showed wear. That is not the work of an animal investigating an unfamiliar object and losing interest or growing frustrated with it. That is the work of something that understood exactly what the object did, decided it did not want to be recorded, and solved the problem with the smallest possible amount of disturbance to the evidence of having solved it. I ordered 6 new cameras, different housing, different mounts, and put the old ones back as decoys with no SD cards inside. Within 2 weeks, the decoys had been repositioned. The new cameras had not been touched. It had a working model of which equipment was mine to watch with and which equipment had already been dealt with, and it updated that model the moment I changed anything. That is the sentence the evidence produces. I stopped thinking of it as a security problem somewhere around then, because a security problem is solvable, and what I had was something that was studying my farm with more patience than I was studying it. In September and October, it started leaving things on my back porch. The first time, I almost missed it. I came out at 6 in the morning to feed the barn cats, and there was a small grouping of objects sitting at the base of the steps, close enough to the bottom riser that I had to look twice before I registered it as anything other than debris blown in overnight. A creek stone, a section of oak branch stripped of bark in long, even strokes that no animal's chewing or rubbing produces, and a cluster of wild ginseng root, dirt still clinging to it, pulled rather than cut. They were not scattered the way wind scatters things. They were grouped with a clear center and a periphery, the kind of arrangement a person makes when they are presenting something rather than discarding it. A second arrangement appeared 11 days later in almost the same spot. This one was different in its particulars and identical in its logic. A larger stone, a piece of deer antler that had been shed naturally rather than cut, and a strip of green painted wood I recognized immediately because it matched the siding on the east face of my own equipment shed. Each deposit drew from a different part of the property: water, forest, my own structures. One object from each category every time, laid out with the same deliberate grouping as before. The third arrangement, on a Wednesday in October, included one of my own trail camera mounting brackets, one I had used before I switched to the decoy setup, the kind I had assumed simply went missing in the handling of all that equipment. It had not gone missing. It had been kept for weeks, and then returned to me in a context that made its meaning hard to avoid. Placed at the center, surrounded by the now familiar stone and stripped wood, with grip impressions pressed into the plastic housing at an angle, and with a pressure no human hand makes, the kind of grip force that is ordinary for something built considerably larger and stronger than I am. It was telling me it knew about the cameras, and that it had taken one, and that it wanted me to find out. I sat with that bracket on my kitchen table for a long time, turning it over, running my thumb along the deformed plastic. Then I went out to the back porch at dusk and looked at the south tree line until the light went, and I did not see anything, though I have thought since about what it might have seen. A man who had spent 8 months pointing cameras into the dark, finally sitting still in the open, looking back. The arrangement stopped after October. The visits did not. The frequency held through the rest of the fall. Same route, same hours, same managed distance from the house. I assumed by early November that I had reached some kind of plateau with it, that we had each taken the other's measure and settled into a wary, mutual arrangement that was not going to change again. I had started, against my own better judgment, to feel something close to comfortable with the shape of it. 11 months is long enough to build a routine around almost anything, even this. I was wrong about that on the 9th of November at the south fence line at 6 in the morning in a frost so heavy it had silvered the whole pasture. I want to tell this part exactly the way I found it, because I have gone over the order of discovery many times since, and the order matters. It is the order that turned a strange morning into the thing that has kept me up since. I was walking the south fence to check a section of wire that had been loose since the previous week, carrying a roll of new wire and a pair of fencing pliers, the way I have walked that fence on 100 mornings before this one without finding anything I needed to think twice about. The sun was not up yet. The frost that morning was the heaviest I had seen since the previous winter, thick enough on the pasture grass that my boots left a clean, dark print with every step, thick enough that I could see my own breath holding in front of me without moving for longer than it should have. Anything that had crossed that ground in the last several hours had left a track you could read from 20 feet away, a dark, disturbed path cut through silver, and I noticed the first of those paths before I had gone 50 yards, because it ran roughly along my fence line, which is the kind of thing I check out of habit before I check anything else. It did not run along my fence line. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong, and it took a moment to register exactly why. It ran along the outside of it, on the timber side, and instead of moving from one point to another, the way a travel route does, it doubled back on itself again and again in a tight repeated weave that covered the same 80-yard stretch of ground maybe a dozen times over, by my count of the overlapping frost track where one pass had crossed another, back and forth, not a path, a pattern. The kind of mark that only gets left by something that has stayed in one stretch of ground for a long time, moving the entire time, without going anywhere. Pacing my fence line on the outside the entire night by the look of the frost disturbance. I stood there for a minute before I went any further, because that alone was enough to stop me. 11 months of cameras and arrangements on the porch and repositioned mounts, and I had never once found sign of it simply staying in place this way. Agitated by the look of the track working the same ground over and over instead of moving through on its circuit the way it always had. Whatever had walked this stretch the night before had not been passing through. It had been doing something, and it had been doing it for hours. At the eastern end of the pacing track, where the fence line bends north along the edge of the timber stand, I found the second set of prints, and that is when the morning stopped being merely strange and started being something I had to sit with, not the ones I had spent 8 months learning to read at a glance. Smaller, narrower in the stride, with a different rhythm to the spacing, quicker, lighter, four-toed, with claw marks scored into the frost just ahead of each pad. A gait pattern I know because I have walked behind it on this land for 22 years and tracked it through every season there is, in mud and snow and dust, and now frost. Coyote. A big one, judging by the spacing between prints, but unmistakably a coyote, and not one animal traveling alone. 3 separate sets, moving together, the kind of loose triangular formation a small pack holds when it is moving with purpose rather than just ranging. I followed that second track and found that it told its own story, distinct from the pacing but woven through it, at 6 separate points along the same 80-yard stretch. Each time, the 3 sets approached the fence line from the timber side, closing the distance steadily, the stride shortening the way. A stride shortens when an animal is closing in carefully rather than charging, and each time at almost exactly the same distance out. I paced it off later, 29 to 32 feet, 6 times, close enough to call it the same number. The 3 sets stopped, bunched, and turned back into the trees. No closer approach on any of the 6. No second attempt from a different angle. 6 clean stops at 6 places along roughly the same line, like there was a line drawn in the frost that none of them were willing to cross. 6 places along that 80-yard stretch where 3 coyotes had approached my fence line in the dark and stopped, and turned around and gone back the way they came, every single time. I have run cattle on this property for 22 years. I have lost calves to coyotes twice in that span, both times in hard winters when the deer thinned out and the den pressure on the ridge got bad enough that a fence line stopped being much of a deterrent on its own. I know what a coyote pack looks like when it has decided a pasture is worth the risk of a fence and a porch light and a man with a rifle, because I have stood over the evidence of that decision twice, and it is not something you forget. It does not look like 6 approaches and 6 retreats in a single night without a single attempt at the wire. Coyotes that have committed to testing a fence test it. They probe weak points. They circle. They do not simply walk up to the same spot 6 times and lose their nerve for no visible reason. Something had made them turn around 6 times in the same place all night, and something was not the fence. I followed the pacing track all the way to its end at the southwest corner post, and that is where I found the place it had stood the longest. A wide, packed-down ellipse in the frost, the silver crushed flat and dark across an area roughly the footprint of a small car, facing out toward the timber, the kind of mark that does not come from passing through a place, but from standing in it, weight shifted from foot to foot for a long stretch of time. I have seen cattle leave a mark like that on a cold night when they bunch and hold position for hours. I had never seen anything leave a mark like that alone, upright, at the edge of my own fence line, facing the exact direction the coyotes had come from every time. I stood at that corner post for a long time myself, working out what I was looking at, turning the 2 tracks over against each other until they stopped being 2 separate things and became one story. For 11 months, I had built a careful record of something that studied my equipment, learned the layout of my structures, listened at my window, and left objects on my porch steps that I had eventually learned to read as a kind of communication. I had organized every part of that record around a single question: what does it want from me? What is it trying to tell me? What am I to it? I had not once asked what else might want something from this farm. I had not asked whether the reason I had gone 20 years without a third bad coyote winter, the reason the herd had held steady at 43 head with no calf losses at all since the spring before any of this started, might have a cause I had simply never had reason to look for, because nothing had ever forced me to look. Whether the cause of that good fortune had been standing 80 yards from my fence line at 6 o'clock that morning, walking the same stretch of ground back and forth in the frost all night, holding a line that something else had spent 6 separate attempts trying to cross before it finally gave up and went back into the trees. I did not sleep well that week. I went back out to that stretch of fence the next 4 mornings before first light, with a flashlight and the same roll of wire I never got around to using, and on 3 of those 4 mornings, the frost held a new pacing track in roughly the same place, the same tight repeated weave along the same 80 yards. On 2 of those 3 mornings, the coyote sign was there as well. The same 6-point pattern of approach and retreat from the timber side, the same stopping distance, near enough to 30 feet each time that I have stopped bothering to measure it more precisely than that. On the 4th morning, there was nothing at all. No pacing track, no coyote sign, just frost, undisturbed, the whole length of the fence line quiet in a way that should have been a relief, and instead made the back of my neck go cold, because I had no way of knowing whether that meant the coyotes had given up, or moved on to test a different stretch of fence, or a different farm entirely, with no one standing between them and whatever they were after. It is still out there walking that line some nights, I do not know if I will be walking it tonight. I have not put a camera back on that stretch of fence, and I want to be honest about why. I have decided I do not want a clear answer to what happens on the night the coyotes do not turn around. Some part of me believes that not knowing is the only reason I have been able to keep doing this the way I have been doing it. Feeding the herd, checking the wire, sleeping in my own house at night, on a property where something I cannot name has apparently been standing between my cattle and a threat I never knew was testing them. The scanner is still running in the shed, every night, same as always. The new cameras are still up, untouched, recording whatever they record. I have not gone back to the southwest corner post since the 4th morning. I tell myself it is because the wire held and there was nothing left to fix there. That is not the whole reason. I do not know what is going to happen at that fence line next. I only know that whatever has been walking my farm for 11 months is not finished with the part of its work that I have not been allowed to see, and that the part I have not been allowed to see may be the only reason any of the rest of it was ever survivable. Not just for me, but for everything on this property that cannot put up a fence of its own. Some nights I stand at the kitchen window instead of going out to the porch, and I look at the dark line of the south tree line from inside, with the lights off, the way you look at something you have decided you would rather watch than meet. I have not seen it since November. I have not stopped looking. I keep the rifle by the back door now, where it never used to need to be, not because I think I will need it for the thing that walks my fence line, but because I no longer know for certain what else might be out there on a night when the usual arrangement does not hold. Trail cam 4 kicks on at 6:02 in the evening, and the first thing I notice isn't the rangers setting up camp. It's the ridgeline 400 yards back, sitting there in the wide shot like a smudge somebody forgot to clean off the lens. 15 minutes later, at 6:17, a low-frequency pop rolls across the audio track, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to wind or branches or anything with a name. I rewind it 3 times before I let myself keep going, because that's the moment Bigfoot enters this footage, standing dead still on that ridge for 4 straight minutes, its head swaying side to side with a rhythm that's way too deliberate to be an animal grazing or scratching an itch. This is a body reading a room. I pull up the thermal overlay that got applied after the fact, and this is where my stomach starts to turn. The chest cavity on that silhouette is expanding and contracting in a pattern, and when I line it up against the audio of the rangers talking down at the tents, it matches. Breath for breath, syllable for syllable, Bigfoot is breathing along with their conversation from 400 yards out, like it's tasting the shape of their voices before it ever gets close enough to use them. Whatever is about to happen to Dex, Sarah, Leo, and Captain Hale, it started right here, with something enormous standing in the tree line and turning their small talk into a blueprint. The next file is Hale's body cam, timestamped 6 minutes after the trail cam picked up that pop. Roll call audio, mundane stuff, Dex griping about radio static, Sarah rambling about some plant she found, Leo laughing that nervous laugh people do when the woods feel a little too quiet. I almost skip past it until I isolate the ambient track and hear it, a fractional second echo riding underneath Hale's own voice, a harmonic duplication that has no business existing in an open field with no canyon walls to bounce off of. I check the delay against the distance to that ridge, and it lines up exactly. Bigfoot isn't just watching, Bigfoot is already rehearsing. By the time I get to the crime scene photographs, the tent is sitting there, almost peaceful, which is somehow worse. A coffee mug, Sarah's botanical journal flipped open to a blank page like she never got the chance to write in it. A signal booster nobody thought to check before they went to sleep. And then, right outside the tent flap, pressed into soft mud and facing inward toward where the rangers slept, a single dermal ridge print, twice the size of a grown man's palm. The ridge is so uniform, it reads less like a footprint and more like a signature. Bigfoot stood there while 4 people slept 10 feet away, close enough to reach in, and chose to just look instead. I sit with that print for a long time before moving forward because it tells me something about what this is. This isn't a startled animal wandering into a camp by accident. Bigfoot came to that tent on purpose, stood at that flap on purpose, and left that mark on purpose. Everything after this point in the footage is going to be Bigfoot closing a loop it opened in that first hour. And once I understand that, the rest of the night stops looking random and starts looking like a countdown. Cameras 7 and 12 pick up the next stretch between 8:15 and 10:40, and stacking the two angles together is what finally shows me the full shape of what's circling that camp. Bigfoot is out there at 200 yards now, tighter than before, moving in a slow counterclockwise loop around the tents. The thermal catches two smaller heat signatures flanking it on either side, and that detail alone changes the whole tone of this file for me. This isn't one creature stalking four rangers. This is a family unit working a perimeter, and Bigfoot is the one running point. Camera 12 has the piece of audio I can't get out of my head, no matter how many times I mute it and try to move on. Bigfoot opens its mouth, and instead of a growl or a roar, out comes this guttural, rapidly shifting collage of human words, stitched together with no grammar and no mercy. Sarah's laugh spliced against hail-barking, hold position, Leo's frightened little exhale looped into the mix like a drumbeat. It's not talking, it's sampling. Bigfoot has taken 3 hours of ambient conversation and turned it into something closer to a chant, and it's playing that chant back into the dark like it's testing which piece gets the strongest reaction. Sarah's body cam picks up her trip down to the creek at 9:30, and this is where the sampling stops being abstract and starts getting personal. Her mic catches a whisper clean enough to transcribe, a voice doing an impression of her mother, telling her how cold it is and asking her to come find them. She spins the light around fast, and it lands on a tree that's been debarked in a perfect spiral from root to crown, stripped clean like something ran a blade around it in one continuous motion. Nobody is in frame. Nobody has to be. Bigfoot already left the marker and already delivered the message, and now it just has to wait for her to decide whether to walk toward the sound. The photo archive from that stretch of the night lays the geometry out for me in a way that's almost clinical. Footprint casts form an unbroken 200-yard circle around the camp, each print spaced 18 inches apart, every single one angled toward the center like spokes on a wheel. Whatever is making these tracks held that exact spacing for 3 hours without a single stumble or correction, which tells me Bigfoot isn't improvising a patrol. It's executing one. And the debarked tree isn't just vandalism either, because lab work on the stripped wood turns up trace amounts of a protein compound nobody can fully identify, something that mimics human pheromones close enough to spike anxiety in anyone who gets near it. Bigfoot didn't just mark that tree, Bigfoot seasoned it. Camera 2 flips everything into a different gear at 11:05. Out of pure darkness, a rock the size of a melon materializes and catches Hale square in the shoulder. And in the same half-second, a jet of superheated steam rips out of a fissure right by Leo's feet. The microphone can't keep up with what happens next, distorting hard as Dex grabs at his ear, and even though the audio flattens out into a sub-20 Hz pressure wave that shouldn't register as anything at all, the air on camera visibly shimmers, like heat coming off asphalt. That's Bigfoot's voice at a register the human ear was never built to hold on to, and it's already doing damage before anyone even understands they're under attack. Dex's body cam from a few seconds later shows the audio going muffled, his footing giving out, and then his hand pulling a 4-inch needle-barbed quill out of his own calf, which I have to correct myself on because the field notes actually tag this injury to Sarah, and either way, the object he's holding up to the lens is not something that grows on any animal native to Montana. It's hollow, it's chitinous, and whatever coats those barbs is glistening in a way that tells me it isn't blood. Bigfoot isn't just circling this camp anymore. Bigfoot is testing what these four rangers are made of, one small, deliberate injury at a time, and none of it looks like an accident of nature. The forensic reports from this stretch are the part that really gets under my skin because they keep ruling out every normal explanation one at a time. Haley's shoulder shows a compression bruise with zero blunt force trauma to the fabric, meaning whatever hit him applied that force through the air itself, hydrostatically, without a projectile ever actually striking the uniform in the way a thrown rock should. Leo's burned fingers trace back to soil that only melts north of 400 degrees Fahrenheit, confirming that steam vent didn't open on its own. It got triggered by a percussive strike to the ground, timed perfectly to Leo's position. And the quill pulled from the ranger's leg carries a neurotoxin built for exactly one purpose: freeze the muscles and crank the ears up so high that every whisper Bigfoot makes afterward lands like a shout pressed right against the skull. A single drop of blood recovered off a leaf near the injury site comes back with adrenaline levels that are, frankly, off the chart the lab normally works with, and that tells its own story. Whoever bled onto that leaf was fully conscious and fully aware while something was extracted from their leg, paralyzed but not blind, not deaf, not spared a single second of it. Bigfoot didn't want unconsciousness. Bigfoot wanted them awake for what came next. And by the time I get to the next set of files, I understand exactly why. Cameras 5 and 9 catch the moment everything breaks apart, timestamp 12:15 in the morning, and it happens in under a second. 2 screams hit the microphones from opposite directions at the exact same millisecond. Sarah's voice calling out for Hale from the north tree line, and Leo's voice calling out for Sarah from the south, both of them layered with a panic that sounds completely real. Hale and Dex bolt north, Sarah and Leo bolt south, and the thermal feed shows Bigfoot standing perfectly still right in the gap between the two groups as they run in opposite directions, its chest vibrating without a sound, reaching the mic. It never gives chase in this moment. It doesn't have to. Bigfoot just planted itself at the fork in the road and let 4 terrified people do the rest of the work themselves. Hale's body cam from 2 minutes later plays back a radio transmission that makes my hands go cold every time I loop it. It's Sarah's voice, technically pitch perfect, except the words are wrong for who Sarah actually is, describing her legs being crushed and begging Hale not to leave her behind. His heart rate monitor, folded into the body cam telemetry, goes from a manageable spike straight into a flatlined, arrhythmic mess. He's sprinting on borrowed panic now, chasing a voice that Bigfoot built specifically to send him in the wrong direction, and every stride he takes is one Bigfoot predicted he would take. The tracking report from the divergence point gives me the clearest picture yet of how coordinated this actually is. A length of rope lies snapped at the split, pulled apart by force rather than cut clean, and laid over the ranger's own footprints is a third set of tracks, smaller, a 6-foot stride, running parallel to Sarah's group the entire way. It's matching her gait step for step in the mud, which means Bigfoot brought a juvenile along specifically to confuse anyone trying to read these tracks later, muddying the exact kind of evidence a search team would rely on. This is a hunt with a division of labor. The adult drives the panic, the juvenile erases the trail, and Bigfoot, in whichever body is doing which job, never once loses control of the situation. Before I get to the bog, there's a stretch of footage from camera 8 that almost got filed as junk data because the frame is so shaky, and once I stabilize it, I understand why nobody wanted to sit with it for long. It picks up Sarah and Leo 40 seconds into their run south, cutting across a shallow creek bed, and for 11 seconds, the two of them are actually gaining ground, putting real distance between themselves and whatever's behind them. Then a shape drops out of the canopy directly into their path, not the adult, something leaner, faster, moving on all fours for 3 full strides before rising up onto 2 legs at the last second. Bigfoot doesn't touch either of them. It just plants itself in the creek bed, forcing their sprint to bend hard to the left, funneling them off the flat ground and up toward the rocks, toward the exact terrain that later holds the fissure. I watch that 11-second stretch 4 separate times before I accept what it actually shows me, which is Bigfoot herding, not chasing, correcting their path the way a sheepdog corrects a flock without ever once biting down. Leo's own body cam catches a few frantic seconds of that same detour, his light swinging wildly across bark and stone, and buried under his own ragged breathing is a second breathing pattern, lower, slower, keeping perfect pace behind him, no matter how hard he pushes. It's not gaining. It's not falling back. It's pacing him, the same patient rhythm I'll hear again later pressed against the limestone. And hearing it here first tells me Bigfoot had already picked Leo's ending before Leo had picked his hiding spot. The search team's tracking log backs this up with something I almost skipped past on my first read, a secondary print trail branching off from the main chase route, cutting at an angle that intercepts the fissure a full 2 minutes before Leo's own footprints arrive there, meaning whatever was hurting him had already scouted the exact crack in the rock he was about to think was his own idea. There's a smaller piece of physical evidence from this same stretch that the initial report almost buried in a footnote, a snapped carabiner recovered from the creek bed, still clipped to a torn loop of nylon, webbing that used to be part of Leo's climbing kit. The metal isn't bent from a fall or a snag on rock. It's sheared clean through, the kind of cut you'd expect from a tool, not a tumble, And lab analysis on the fracture edge finds microscopic striations consistent with something raking across it at speed, a claw or a nail dragged hard enough to slice hardened steel without ever slowing down the animal doing it. Bigfoot didn't need to grab Leo to control him. Cutting one strap at the right second was enough to make sure he couldn't climb his way out of the path being laid out for him. And that's the kind of precision that keeps showing up every time I think I've found the edge of what this thing is capable of. Hale and Dex's Run North gets its own short but brutal entry from camera 11, timestamped just 2 minutes after the split, and it's the clearest look I get at how fast this thing can actually move when it wants to be seen doing it. The two men are cutting through dense brush, Hale still shouting orders into a radio that isn't reaching anyone, when a wall of branches directly ahead of them simply stops moving, like something enormous just settled into place and decided to wait. Bigfoot doesn't charge out of that brush. It just stands up out of it, unfolding to a height that makes both men flinch backward without either one screaming, and for a full 2 seconds, the three of them are frozen in the frame, predator and prey sizing each other up before Bigfoot simply steps sideways and lets them pass. It didn't need to stop them here, it only needed to prove it could have. Dex's own body cam picks up a detail in that same encounter that the review team flagged as a priority anomaly, a low, resonant vibration running through the audio track that doesn't match footsteps, engine noise, or wind, something closer to a held note. Sustained for the entire 2 seconds, Bigfoot is standing in frame. When the audio engineers isolate and slow that vibration down, it resolves into something horribly specific. A stretched, guttural fragment of Dex's own name, dragged out so long it barely sounds like language anymore. Bigfoot wasn't just standing there. It was already speaking to him, low enough that his conscious brain never registered it as words, planting something that wouldn't surface again until he was face down in that bog, 40 minutes later, listening to his own breath get echoed back at him. The physical evidence from this stretch is thinner than the rest, mostly because neither man stopped moving long enough to leave much behind. But the search team does recover one object worth noting: Hale's spare radio battery found 40 yards off the main route, its casing split open, not by impact, but by what the report describes as compressive force applied evenly across the entire shell, the kind of pressure you'd get from a hand large enough to wrap fully around a device built to survive a fall onto rock. Bigfoot didn't drop that battery by accident during a chase. Bigfoot picked it up at some point during those 2 frozen seconds, crushed it in one motion, and let it fall, a small, silent guarantee that whatever call Hale was trying to get out that night was never going to leave the valley. Camera 14 picks up Dex at 1:03 in the morning, stumbling into a stagnant peat bog in the dark, and what I watch next is the slowest, most deliberate thing in the entire file. Bigfoot stays up on the bank, uproots a dead 12-foot spruce like it's pulling a weed, and uses the trunk as a lever to press Dex face down into the black water. There's no frenzy to it. The pressure comes in a steady, 3-minute rhythm, calibrated, patient, the massive hands gripping that branch and holding steady the way someone holds a door shut. Bigfoot isn't drowning Dex out of aggression. Bigfoot is drowning him on a schedule. Dex's own body cam is the hardest file in this whole case for me to sit through. The lens goes half submerged, all murky water and rising bubbles. And underneath it, his own labored, gurgling breathing gets broadcast right back at him from somewhere above the surface. Bigfoot is exhaling in perfect sync with Dex's own dying breaths, looping his last moments back into his ears as they happen, and when his final exhale finally comes, it's answered by one massive, booming inhale from directly above the water. He goes under, listening to his own death get rehearsed by something that learned to breathe exactly like him hours earlier. On that ridge, that opening scene with the chest cavity mimicking their conversation, this is what it was building toward the whole time. The recovery log fills in the aftermath once the bog gets drained. Dex's tactical vest turns up 20 feet from the water, folded with a precision that no panicked person leaves behind on their way to save a drowning friend. The spruce branch comes back covered in palm prints, too large for any bear this side of the continent, and sealed in a waterproof case on the bank sits a small audio recorder holding a 5-minute loop of Dex's own breathing, gradually, deliberately, morphing into Bigfoot's low, guttural purr by the end of the track. Bigfoot didn't just kill him, Bigfoot kept the recording, Camera 17 jumps ahead to 128 and finds Leo squeezed into a narrow limestone fissure. And this is where I start to realize Bigfoot has a different method for every single ranger, tailored, almost personal. Bigfoot arrives at the mouth of the crack, crouches down, looks in, and doesn't reach a single finger inside. Instead, it presses its chest flat against the rock face and starts beating a slow rhythm into the stone. One heavy thump every 2 seconds, and the camera sensor actually picks up the surrounding rock, shuddering fine dust sifting down off the ceiling with each impact. Leo's body cam is total darkness at this point, just his own voice whispering that he's safe right before the infrasound hits and proves him wrong. When I run the audio through a filter, it comes back locked onto a sustained 12 Hz, which happens to be close to the resonant frequency of human bone and calcium carbonate both, meaning Bigfoot picked this exact rhythm on purpose, aimed at the exact material trapping Leo and the exact material holding his skeleton together. His scream cuts off mid-breath as the ceiling above him starts shattering into sand, raining down in sheets, and the very last thing the microphone captures before the lens cracks and dies is Bigfoot humming, note for note, the same lullaby Leo's mother used to sing him, played back with a precision that leaves no room to call it coincidence. The excavation crew digs 15 feet into that collapsed fissure and comes up with nothing but pulverized limestone dust and Leo's crushed helmet, flattened the way a hydraulic press flattens a can, and yet there's no blood, no tissue, nothing you'd expect from a body caught under that much rock. What they do find, laced through the dust itself, is a fine red-tinged particulate that matches Leo's DNA, which tells me his body wasn't just buried under that stone, it got folded into it. And when they finally pull the SD card and play back that final lullaby file, it runs backward, every note reversed, like Bigfoot recorded a message and then deliberately scrambled it before letting anyone hear it a second time. Camera 21 is stationed behind a 30-foot waterfall, and it catches Sarah at 2:10 trying to hide inside the curtain of falling water like it might actually shield her. It doesn't. Bigfoot steps through that wall of water like it's nothing heavier than a light drizzle, completely unbothered by 30 feet of freezing runoff pouring straight down. A massive, hairy arm reaches through the cascade and closes around her ankle, and instead of yanking her out into the open, Bigfoot holds her under, submerged in the plunge pool, her face just beneath the surface, where the clear, dark water lets the camera catch every second of it. Her own body cam lurches downward in the same instant, framing pale, almost webbed-looking fingers wrapped tight around her boot. Underneath the constant roar of the falls, a soft motherly whisper somehow cuts clean through the noise, telling her it's okay, telling her to just go to sleep, using her own mother's voice like it's been sitting in storage waiting for this exact moment. Her struggling slows down over the next minute and a half until it stops completely, and the picture fades out to white, right as her body goes still. Bigfoot didn't drown her the way it drowned Dex. Bigfoot lulled her. The dive team searches the pool downstream and never recovers a body, only Sarah's botanical sampling kit wedged between 2 rocks near the base, and inside it, a single long gray hair with a medulla pattern that doesn't match any known primate on record. Her body cam turns up completely dry on the bank, placed there instead of dropped there, which is its own kind of message. And on the final frame of playback, right after her death, the reflection sitting on the water's surface distorts for exactly 1 frame, wearing her face and her uniform for a heartbeat before the footage cuts. Bigfoot leaves nothing behind by accident, and that includes this. Camera 25 catches the last stand at 3 o'clock in the morning, high up on a rocky ridge where Hale has clearly decided he's not running anymore. He fires a flare straight at Bigfoot, and for 3 full seconds, the burn lights up a face that stops me cold every time I watch it back. Flat, almost human in its proportions, carrying absolutely no malice in it at all, just cold, patient observation, like it's grating him. Bigfoot sidesteps the flare without any real urgency, walks over to a moss-covered boulder, and pushes. The boulder rolls straight into Hale's pelvis, pinning him against the loose scree, and just like that, the last ranger standing is the last ranger down. Hale's body cam tips up toward a dark, empty sky, his breathing already ragged, and he keys his radio 1 final time, ordering whoever might still be listening to acknowledge his transmission, his voice carrying every ounce of command he has left in him. Bigfoot steps into frame, leans down over him, opens its mouth, and answers him back in his own voice, his own baritone, his own authority, repeating his final order back to him word for word with an inflection so exact it sounds like a recording rather than a mimic. Then it just turns and walks off, leaving him pinned there to bleed out in the cold while his own voice keeps bouncing off the canyon walls for 4 more minutes before the breathing on the track finally goes quiet. The recovery photo shows that boulder still sitting exactly where it landed, and underneath it, his crushed radio and his loaded flare gun, both useless in the end. The forensic audio team pulls a 10-minute file off that radio, and the first 5 minutes are exactly what you'd expect. His death rattle slowing down in real time. The second 5 minutes are the part nobody in that lab was prepared for. Bigfoot's voice reciting his military serial number, his wife's name, and his home address. Information it had no earthly way of gathering except by pulling it straight out of his own sub-vocalized dying thoughts. Bigfoot didn't just kill Captain Hale. Bigfoot went through his head on the way out. Camera 1 gives me the widest angle in the whole archive, a valley-wide overview at 5:30 as the sun starts coming up over the ridgelines. And this is where the file stops being about 4 individual deaths and starts looking like a system. 2 juvenile shapes come out of the tree line first, moving calm and unhurried, and they don't touch a single body because there are no bodies left to touch. Instead, they move from kill site to kill site, gathering up helmets, vests, boots, whatever gear got left behind, and hauling it all back to a clearing where they lay it out in 4 neat, deliberate piles, one for each ranger, arranged with a kind of ritual care that has no reason to exist unless it means something to them. Bigfoot arrives last, walks straight to Dex's recovered audio recorder sitting among the gear, and plays that breathing loop back one more time into the open morning air, and both juveniles lift their heads toward the sound at exactly the same moment, like students following a lesson. That's the detail that stays with me longest out of everything in this footage, the idea that whatever happened to these 4 rangers overnight wasn't just an attack, it was a demonstration, something Bigfoot was actively teaching to the next generation standing beside it. A dense fog bank rolls into that clearing faster than any fog has a right to move, swallowing the piles, the juveniles, and Bigfoot itself. And by the time camera 1 clears up enough to see anything again, the valley is empty, like none of it ever happened at all, except for 4 cameras worth of footage saying otherwise. Every time I think I've reached the bottom of this file, another detail surfaces that pushes the whole picture further than I want it to go. And that's really the through line of this entire night. 4 trained rangers walked into that valley with radios, flares, and each other, and Bigfoot took every one of those advantages and turned it into exactly the tool needed to end them.